I transmigrated to this other world equipped with a god-tier system, only to find myself trapped in the Novice Village for 3,000 years, unable to leave. Just as I was nearing the brink of madness from sheer boredom, various familiar figures began to seek me out. The demon empress Jiang Yuyan, the first emperor Qin Shi Huang, and the ancestor of the Kun sect. To find some amusement in my monotonous existence, I began to divulge the secrets of their destinies and offered them minor guidance. Unexpectedly, I inadvertently unlocked the true intended method for utilizing the system. Cultivation-based techniques and divine abilities poured into me incessantly, until one day I awakened the Eye of Truth, only to discover that the forbidden land which the great experts of the 9 heavens and 10 earths were desperately attacking was none other than the Novice Village where I resided. At this moment, after 10 years of grueling practice, I finally stepped into the first level of chi refining. I, your father, have finally succeeded. In a surge of excitement, I threw a single punch toward my palace, and immediately the entire structure exploded into ruins. I stood there stunned. That was my only place of residence. But before I could even process the loss, the ruins began to glow on their own, and within a few breaths, the palace was restored to its original state. At that very moment, the jade pendant around my neck floated up of its own accord, and 3 golden characters appeared within it, Lu Chu. The first level of the chi refining realm grants the body a total transformation, where a single wave of the hand carries the weight of 100,000 jin. I had scavenged this item from an ancient tomb, and ever since my transmigration it had hung around my neck. I had always assumed it was merely an auxiliary tool, yet after 10 years of silence, it finally showed signs of activity today. It is a pity that apart from displaying my cultivation realm, it refused to divulge anything else. I probed it thoroughly but could find no further tricks to it, yet having broken through my realm today, my spirits were naturally high. I decided to head to the pond to catch some fish to prepare an extra dish for my meal. A stream of spiritual energy flickered from my fingertip, and a yellow-finned carp flew straight into my hand. As I was carrying the fish and preparing to leave, a voice suddenly came from behind me. "Taoist, are you skilled in the art of divination?" I froze in place upon hearing this. I have lived here for 10,000 years and haven't even seen a ghost, so how could a young woman suddenly appear? I turned around to see a young girl standing there. She had raven-black hair and eyes that sparkled like stars, with thin bangs framing her face, giving her an appearance both obedient and clever. However, her clothes were tattered and her face was covered in grime, as if she had been begging for food throughout her long journey to reach this place. I stared at her intently and asked, "Where did you emerge from?" The young girl replied, "My name is Jiang Yuyan. I seek my father. Could you perhaps tell my fortune for me?" Hearing that name, my heart skipped a beat. Jiang Yuan? Which Jiang is it? Which Yu is it? And which Yan? Jiang Yuyan looked up and said, "The Jiang of rivers, the Yu of jade, and the Yan of the swallow." I drew a sharp breath. This face, these eyes, combined with that name, it was clearly the notorious female villain who slaughtered the entire cast, leaving only the title of the story behind. I suppressed my internal turmoil and led her forward, questioning her about her background as we walked. Jiang Yuyan spoke honestly, explaining that before her mother passed away, she was given half of a jade pendant and told to seek out her biological father. Having searched along the way without success, someone suggested she visit a Taoist temple for a divination, but while traveling, she felt dizzy and found herself here. I understood immediately. She herself had no idea how she had arrived, but my concern was how she might return. As the thought crossed my mind, a golden countdown appeared within the jade orb, the 24 hours beginning to tick away. I instantly deduced that this young woman could likely only remain here for a day, after which she would be sent back to her original world. Zhang remained there, urging me on. "Taoist Lu, are you able to tell my fortune?" I nearly laughed aloud. I did not know how to practice divination, but I certainly knew how to reveal the plot. And so I put on a charade feigning complex calculations with my fingers before looking up at her, warning, should my reading be incorrect, do not blame me. I then probed with a calculated question. "Was your mother a woman who fled from a house of pleasure?" Upon hearing this, Jiang Yuyan's eyes widened, and from her expression I knew I had struck the truth. I continued, "From a young age, you wandered everywhere with your mother, experiencing begging, imprisonment, and servitude under others, often relying on singing to sustain your livelihood. Not long ago, your mother passed away, and as she lay dying she gave you half a jade pendant, telling you to take it and find your biological father." Hearing this, Jiang Yuyan was completely stunned. "Taoist Lu, you have divined everything correctly." She then hastily handed the jade pendant to me. "This is the keepsake my mother left behind. Please help me examine it." I took the pendant from her. The corresponding plot points became crystal clear in my mind and I spoke slowly. "Your father's name is Jiang Bihe." Her eyes suddenly brightened. "It is indeed the great hero, Jiang Bihe." Just as she was anticipating the moment of reuniting with her father, my tone abruptly turned cold. "Do not rejoice too soon. The tribulations destined for your life are far from over. You will be sold into a brothel and forced to endure unspeakable humiliation. That father of yours is not a man of virtue either. He will never openly acknowledge you as his own. His new wife will be even less inclined to tolerate your existence. She will trample you into the black mud, forcing you to perform the most menial and degrading tasks, compelling you to live no better than a dog, and stripping you of your dignity until your very name is changed to Little Puppy." Jiang Yuyan's face turned deathly pale as she listened. I spoke bluntly to finish my words. "Your life is not entirely right, Wolf-like. for you will eventually meet Hua Wuke, who will pull you from the fiery pit at your most wretched hour. It is a pity that his heart already belongs to another, and he will never love you, yet you will persist in throwing yourself at him. Upon hearing this, Jiang Yuyan felt a pain so sharp it took her breath away. Taoist Lu, is everything you say the truth? I sighed. If you do not believe me, simply remember my words and verify them after you return. She grew anxious to return home immediately. I had no choice but to explain to her. You cannot leave just yet. You and I reside in different worlds. However, do not panic. Within 12 hours you will return of your own accord. Jiang Yuyan seemed to grasp the gist of it and asked no further questions. Instead, she stared intently at the fish in my hands. Taoist Lu, allow me to prepare the fish for you. Cooking was her specialty. Before I could stop her, she snatched the fish, asking if I preferred it braised or in a soup. Seeing her earnest demeanor, I finally relented and said braised in a clay pot. She turned and hurried toward the kitchen, but then a strange event unfolded. The yellow-patterned carp suddenly leapt up on its own, spat at her first and then lashed out with its tail, delivering a resounding blow that sent her flying out of the kitchen, where she lay dazed on the ground. I rushed over to help her up, expecting her to be reeling from the impact, but she simply grabbed my sleeve to complain. Taoist Lu, your fish knows how to fly and how to strike people. I have been eating the fish from this pond for 10 years. I know the temperament of every single one better than anyone else. But when she entered the kitchen and saw me, she was stunned. That fish had already been cleaned, placed in the pot, and was stewing itself. Yuyan stood at the doorway, on the verge of a breakdown. She muttered to herself, could it be that the fish even knows how to cook itself? Then she looked at me and said, Taoist Master Lu, my mind is in turmoil, I wish to bathe first. Seeing that she was covered in filth, I agreed that a bath was indeed necessary. I handed her a set of my clean Taoist robes to change into, and led her to the hot spring chamber. I frequent this place often. The water remains pleasantly warm throughout all 4 seasons, and soaking in it is highly effective for relieving fatigue. I escorted her to the entrance, told her to call out if she needed anything, and then withdrew. But the moment I closed the door, the hot spring began to exert its power. The spiritual energy surged directly into her body through the water, causing her a moment of alarm. Thinking I intended to harm her, she struggled at first, but in the end, not only was she unharmed, but her governor and conception vessels had actually been unblocked. When she emerged wearing the Taoist robes, her entire presence had undergone a complete transformation. She ran toward me, her face flushed, and bowed in gratitude the moment she saw me. Many thanks, Master Lu. I was caught off guard by this display of gratitude and hurriedly asked her to sit down and dine. The braised fish was brought to the table, and after she took one bite, she froze in place. This was because that single mouthful of fish meat had increased her internal energy. At first, she tried to maintain her composure, but she began to eat faster and faster, eventually coming close to licking the plate clean. Having finished the entire fish, her eyes glowed with a terrifying brilliance. Immortal Master Lu, you must be a celestial being. I hurriedly waved my hand in denial. I am no celestial being. At most, I am merely an ordinary person. However, she refused to believe me, seeing my every gesture and action as the manifestation of an immortal's techniques. After the meal, she hesitated as if wanting to speak, and seeing this gave me a headache, so I told her to speak her mind directly. Jiang Yuyan stared at me, hesitating for a long time before whispering, Immortal Master Lu, I wish to practice martial arts. Would you be willing to teach me? It was not that I did not wish to help, but I truly possessed no conventional martial arts manuals. In my possession, I only had the Origin Convergence Chi Refinement Manual, but that is far too profound. It was uncertain if she could ever comprehend it. Suddenly, I recalled that there might be something on the 2nd floor of the library. Without further ado, I brought her there and let her try to see if she could push the door open, as even I had been unable to budge it previously. The result was that even after she exerted all her strength, the door remained immovable. Standing to the side, I felt a sense of annoyance and casually struck the dilapidated door with my palm. With a resounding thud, the door swung open on its own. Simultaneously, a line of text manifested within the jade orb. One must exert a force of 100,000 jinn to unlock the 2nd level. I was so incensed I nearly cursed aloud. Why had this condition not been stated earlier? Upon entering the 2nd level, I immediately noticed how starkly it contrasted with the first. The bookshelves were arranged in the pattern of the 8 trigrams, packed densely with ancient texts. I approached the Kun section and withdrew a volume. The cover bore the 3 characters Jin Ping. Jiang Yuyan looked at me with earnest curiosity and asked, Immortal Master Lu, what peerless technique is this? I gritted my teeth and replied, this particular cultivation manual is not entirely suitable for practice. Yet she snatched it from my grasp out of curiosity and flipped it open. A single glance was enough to flush her face deep crimson, all the way to her ears. I turned my gaze toward the shelves containing the Yin-Yang Harmonization Manual, the Dragon Phoenix Art, and the Plain Maiden's Inquiry of the Tao, each volume more scandalous than the last. I hurriedly pulled her toward a different area, deciding to avoid that section entirely. The Qian area, thankfully, was far more orthodox. The 9 Yin Manual, the 9 Yang Divine Art, the Dugu 9 Swords, and the 18 Dragon Subduing Palms were all laid out there. I began to browse through them at random. I felt a surge of astonishment, for I grasped these martial arts almost the moment I laid eyes on them. 10 years of studying the Hunyuan Qi refining diagram had honed my comprehension to an extraordinary level. Techniques such as the 18 Dragon Subduing Palms were mastered the moment I finished flipping the pages. However, in terms of sheer lethality, they still paled in comparison to the spiritual energy coursing through my own body. I was just about to let Jiang Yuyan choose for herself. She, however, moved as if beckoned by an unseen force, walking directly toward a specific shelf to withdraw a book. The Wedding Dress Divine Art. She looked up at me. Immortal Master Lu, if I learn this, will it be effective? I pondered for a moment. Most of it was not inherently flawed, but since she had chosen without hesitation, I decided to learn it as well. I glanced at the countdown and saw that time was running short, so I asked her, "Are you certain you wish to stake your future on this?" She nodded decisively. Yes, I have always felt as though this book was calling out to me. Since she had made her choice, I ceased my idle chatter. I began by providing her with an overview of the Wedding Dress Divine Art, before breaking down the core principles to explain them to her. Her talent was truly terrifying. Many concepts required only a single hint from me before she grasped them entirely on her own. In less than 5 hours, she had already comprehended the vast majority of the Wedding Dress Divine Art. After practicing for another 2 or 3 hours, she was already manifesting the primordial true chi. At that moment, only one thought crossed my mind. This woman was truly born to be a demonic enchantress. After she mastered the Jiayi Divine technique, she turned her attention to the wood burial blossom, and the results were even more preposterous. In less than 2 hours, she had already mastered it. Seeing that there was only an hour left, she stopped her studies to begin cleaning the palace, claiming that having learned so much from me, she needed to perform some labor to put her heart at ease. I tried to dissuade her, but seeing it was futile, I left her be. That was until she suddenly paused, looked up, and asked, "Immortal Master Lu, with what I have learned now, is it true that I no longer have any rivals?" I did not need to deliberate. I answered her directly. "There is." Her movements as she wiped the floor came to a sudden halt. "Who is it?" I looked at her, speaking each word with absolute clarity. "It is you yourself." She was stunned for a long while, completely failing to grasp my meaning. I stared at her intently. I delivered the final fatal blow. "Your greatest calamity is not another person, but your own heart, which is shackled by obsession." Jiang Yuyan looked at me, bewildered. "What does it mean to have a heart shackled by obsession?" I asked Immortal Master Lu to enlighten me. I looked at her and replied, "If you could truly harden your resolve, your life is one that could have swept across all under heaven, yet you deliberately entangle yourself in the web of sentiment." Jiang Yuyan blinked, still failing to fully comprehend. I was forced to continue. "I have told you before, you will fall into a brothel and be rescued by Hua Wuke. From that moment on, you will surrender your entire heart to him. Even if you later achieve peerless martial arts, even if you trample over everyone to ascend to the highest throne, you will still meet your demise because of him." Jiang Yuyan's expression shifted. "And what of it?" I locked eyes with her. "Therefore, if you do not correct this, even if you ascend to be the empress, you will ultimately be struck down by the combined efforts of Hua Wukok and Xiao Yuer." Jiang Yuyan's body suddenly stiffened, her breathing became erratic, and her voice trembled. "Immortal Master Lu, is this the destiny you have divined?" Simply gazing at her, Jiang Yuyan took a deep, steadying breath. She calmed her spirit and spoke softly. "If I were to cultivate martial arts and gain the strength to protect myself, would my fate change accordingly?" I shook my head. "I cannot say for certain. Perhaps it will change, or perhaps it will only be delayed." She shifted her gaze and pressed me further. "If I do not cultivate, what will become of me in the end?" This time I laid out the path that was originally destined for her. "You will fall into a brothel, be rescued by Hua Wuke, and eventually reunite with Zhang Bihei. But that father of yours will not cherish you. Your stepmother will treat you like a dog to be trampled, casting you into the filthiest, most miserable existence. Afterward, you will enter the palace, and through a stroke of fortune, you will master supreme techniques. You will step over mountains of corpses, climbing higher and higher, until you finally become the empress. Yet, even as empress, you will meet your end, dying at the hands of Hua Wuke and Xiao Yuer." Upon hearing this, Jiang Yuyan trembled violently, and without hesitation, she bowed deeply to me 3 times. Her voice choked with emotion. "I thank Immortal Lu for revealing these heavenly secrets to me. I knew then that she truly believed me, and the ambition to alter her own fate had taken root in her heart. For her, this was in truth a fortunate turn of events." As she stood up, her gaze upon me shifted. It grew luminous and tender, carrying a strange, unspoken intensity. I worried inwardly, fearing the worst. Would her penchant for obsession now shift its focus toward me? It did not help that she was still wearing my Taoist robes. The collar was loose, and when she knelt earlier, more of her charms had been revealed than was appropriate. Fearing I would appear a scoundrel should I look any longer, I hurriedly averted my eyes. I spoke up to cut the tension. "Time is running short. Do not trouble yourself further. Rest for a while and take the time to change back into your own attire." Jiang Yuyan softly obeyed, her ears flushed a deep red. Her breathing was ragged, and when she returned, she had changed beat back into her original clothes. A sudden melancholic air seemed to surround her, as she arrived carrying my Taoist robe, now thoroughly cleaned. "Immortal Lu, I have washed your robes. Do not forget to bring them inside this evening." I nodded, my thanks. She continued to stare at me, her gaze so intense it made me feel quite uneasy. A moment later, Jiang Yuan spoke again. "Immortal Lu, since there is still some time left, why don't we spar?" I could tell she did not harbor any desire to defeat me. She merely wished to see exactly how strong I truly was. I found myself too indifferent to refuse. "Very well, proceed as you wish." Jiang Yuan nodded with a solemn expression. "Immortal Master Lu, I am making my move." In the next instant, she channeled the wedding dress divine art, unleashing Lu Huyuan's true chi to its absolute limit as she struck a palm toward me. Because it was her first time exerting such power, she was unable to pull back the force of the strike. A thunderous crash echoed as her palm slammed directly into me. Realizing what had happened, she panicked and cried out in haste. Immortal Master Lu, I did not mean to do that. I glanced down at my chest, inwardly amused. What was this, if not a mere tickle? I looked at her and said, do not hold back. Use more of your strength. Jiang Yuan's face darkened. She had clearly exerted her full force in that strike, yet here I was, telling her to try harder. Gritting her teeth, she decided to unleash her full capability. She combined her palm techniques, movement arts, and internal energy in a singular coordinated assault. Yet no matter how she struck, I remained standing exactly where I was. I did not move a single step. To me, this meager amount of force was truly as light as a feather. She persisted for half an incense stick of time, exhausted and drenched in sweat, yet my spiritual energy had not fluctuated in the slightest. Jiang Yuyan gasped for air, her eyes filled with profound admiration as she gazed at me. Immortal Master Lu, you are far too powerful. I merely shook my head. This level of capability of mine is truly nothing in the grand scheme of the Hunyuan realm. However, she did not believe a single word of it. Instead, her eyes sparkled with even greater intensity. Jiang Yu asked me again, Immortal Master Lu, would you allow me to witness a strike performed at your full power? I wish to use it as a goal toward which I can strive in the future. I had no intention of showing off, but her demeanor made it difficult to refuse. Very well, then watch closely. I took a deep breath, turned, and threw a punch toward the palace. The ground immediately fractured, creating a trench of fist force that spanned dozens of meters. It surged forward, crushing everything in its path. With a deafening explosion, the entire palace disintegrated into ruins, sending plumes of smoke and dust rising into the air. Jiang Yuyan was left completely stunned. She finally understood that the person standing before her was not a mere martial artist, but a practitioner wielding the methods of an immortal. Before she could recover from the shock, her figure began to fade. Jiang Yuyan reached out, bewildered. Immortal Master Lu, what is happening to me? I glanced at the jade bead. The countdown had reached its end. Time is up, you must return now. She sighed in relief and quickly composed herself. In these final moments before her departure, she said nothing more, simply staring at me intensely. It was at this very moment that the palace I had reduced to rubble suddenly began to glow once more. The rubble of the Sago Palace flew back into place of its own accord. Within a few breaths, the entire structure was restored to its former state. The shock in Jiang Yuyan's eyes reached its peak, and she could not help but press, Immortal Master Lu, what exactly is this place? I replied to her with only one sentence, the beginner's village of the Hunyuan realm. Jiang Yuyan committed these 6 words to memory, looked at me and spoke, Immortal Master Lu, I will certainly return for you. As soon as she finished speaking, her entire form became translucent and vanished on the spot. I waved my hand casually toward the empty air, bidding her farewell. I do not know if she heard me. The place that had been lively all day was now left to me alone. Just as I was about to retire for the night, the jade bead began to glow, and a line of golden text appeared. Reward 1, first level of chi refining. I could not help but laugh. This object was truly heaven-defying. Since I had cultivated Jiang Yuyan, it was only fitting that it rewarded me in return. I sat down in a cross-legged position. I circulated the Hunyuan Qi refining diagram and began to absorb this influx of cultivation. Spiritual energy poured into me like a river flowing in reverse, continuously surging into my body. In the next moment, my entire being felt as if it had been pulled into an infinite space. In that place, there was no day or night, nor was there the concept of time. I could only refine and absorb without pause. It was not until this power became entirely my own that I was suddenly ejected. In reality, only a few breaths had passed, but when I opened my eyes again, I felt completely transformed. The jade beads displayed text once more. Second level of chi refining. Meridians, bones, and acupoints have been completely cleansed. Within me, a silent sea of stars manifested, and my lifespan had extended to 800 years. I stared at these words for a long time. To have a lifespan of 800 years at merely the second level of chi refining, this Hunyuan realm is truly unreasonable. The more I realize this, the less I dare to act arrogantly. Until I reach the rank of Great Emperor, I shall remain hidden and act with caution. Before I could even catch my breath, the jade bead glowed once again. Reward 2. Immediately after, an egg as white as snow and the size of a human head fell before me. The shell was covered in complex patterns like totems that were impossible to decipher. I circled it for quite some time, ultimately reaching only one conclusion. This thing looks rather peculiar, but if I were to stew it, I would feel a bit regretful. What if a living creature were to hatch from it? At the very least, it would be someone I could converse with. Ideally, a celestial maiden would be best. My mind began to wander into wild fantasies. Unfortunately, the jade pearl showed no interest in my plight. Once the reward was dispensed, it feigned death. I had to fend for myself, experimenting by leaving it in the sun and watering it. 2.5 months passed, and this egg showed no signs of life. I watered it with vegetable broth, soaked it in a hot spring, buried it in the earth, tossed it into a fish pond, and hung it from a willow tree. I exhausted every conceivable method, yet this stubborn egg remained unchanged, tormenting me for another 2.5 years. Finally, my patience was completely spent. Very well, if you refuse to emerge, then don't emerge at all. I threw the egg directly into a pot, added water, and lit a fire beneath it. As the water began to boil, the shell cracked, and I was instantly overjoyed. So, you truly fear boiling water. I hurriedly retrieved it, placed it on the ground, and stared intently. The sound of cracking echoed incessantly. Before long, the shell shattered into pieces, and I was filled with anticipation. I prayed for it to be a celestial maiden. Yet, what crawled out from within was a pitch-black creature. With 4 legs and 2 eyes, it smelled distinctly like a dog. I squatted on the ground, examining it over and over until I finally had to accept reality. No matter how I looked at it, this thing resembled a dog. The only strange detail was that while dogs are mammals, this one had hatched from an egg. Forget it. I will raise it for now. Even if I could not raise a celestial maiden, having a dog would at least bring some vitality to my life. Another year passed. The little creature grew blacker and fatter, though it still could not speak, spending its days barking incessantly. Yet with its presence, my days were truly no longer dull. Each day I either took it for a walk or chatted with it. I even occasionally held it while I slept. I even took the liberty of teaching it my cooking skills. 10 more years drifted by in this fashion. It has now been 20 years since I was trapped in this beginner village. The black dog, once a small dark lump, has grown to the size of a calf. And while my age should naturally have increased, my face looks even younger than it did when I first transmigrated here. If there is one thing that holds true in the path of cultivation, it is that the preservation of one's appearance is beyond reproach. That day, I was preparing to pour all my strength into breaking through the third stage of chi refining when the black dog suddenly began to bark frantically near the vegetable garden. The bark was unlike any other. As my divine sense swept over, it was clear the animal was on high alert. Standing beside the vegetable garden was a man dressed in dragon robes. The man had one hand resting on the hilt of his sword, staring intensely at the black dog. I understood that another intruder had wandered into this place, but I was at the precipice of a breakthrough and had no leisure to concern myself with him. This bottleneck had been difficult to reach. To be interrupted now would be an agonizing regret. Thus, I steeled my resolve. Setting aside all other matters, I formed hand seals, and the spiritual energy immediately surged toward me. Layer upon layer of clouds gathered in the sky, instantly forming a vortex. Lightning began to strike wildly above my head, and I was lifted into the air by the force of the spiritual energy suspended in the void. Upon witnessing this scene, the eyes of the man in the dragon robe trembled in shock. I paid him no heed, focusing my entire being inward, until the spiritual power completely shattered the obstruction within me, and my divine sense surged outward. The third stage of chi refining was finally achieved. With this breakthrough, every movement upon the mountain fell within my perception. The plants, the flowers, even the fluttering of insects, everything became crystal clear. I moved my intent, and my divine sense condensed into the shadow of a blade, slashing across the air. The ancient tree behind the mountain was cleaved in two immediately. This is the true power of the third stage of chi refining. I attempted to extend my divine sense beyond the mountain, but regrettably, it remained blocked by the restrictions. At this moment, the jade pearl displayed the capabilities of the third stage of chi refining. The divine sense can now extend 3,000 meters from the body, and it can condense into physical forms, capable of manifesting blades and swords. As I descended to the ground, the jade pearl displayed a new countdown, another 12 hours. I finally turned and walked toward the vegetable garden. Black Dog stopped barking. As soon as it heard my voice, it immediately fell silent. The man in the dragon robe dared not act rashly and hurriedly cupped his hands in greeting. "Greetings, Immortal Master." I waved my hand. "Do not call me Immortal Master. My name is Lu Chu." The man in the dragon robe offered a strained smile and began to speak. "Immortal Lu, I am Yingzheng, ruler of Qin." So it was him. The first emperor of the ages, Qin Shi Huang, the ancestral dragon himself, had actually been dragged here by the jade pearl. My heart stirred, and I first told the black dog to go pull up some radishes before leading Qin Shi Huang into the palace. Along the way, Qin Shi Huang looked upon everything with a sense of wonder. To him, every corner of this place radiated an ethereal, immortal aura. After he was seated, I asked him about his origins. He did not conceal the truth, stating that for many years he had been seeking immortality. He spoke of Shu Fu, who claimed that there were immortal mountains across the sea, and that the sea god had rejected their meager offerings. Thus, he had ordered the construction of a terrace to appease the gods and dispatched Shu Fu to the eastern seas. The terrace is now complete, and the departure is scheduled for 2 months from now. To show his earnest devotion, he had set out to bid the expedition farewell in person. Unexpectedly, he was ambushed along the way, but his guards managed to help him flee into a Taoist temple. With a sudden blur before his eyes, he found himself transported here. Upon hearing this, I realized the timeline matched perfectly. This was none other than the first emperor of Qin, shortly before he dispatched Shu Fu on his second voyage. This meant he was not long away from his inevitable passing at Shakyu. I informed him that this was the Hunyuan realm and did not belong to the Great Qin, but told him not to panic, as he would be able to return in 12 hours. Upon hearing this, Qin Shi Huang's respect deepened even further. He was convinced I was truly an immortal, for only a celestial being could transport a man here in the blink of an eye. However, my next words left him completely stunned. "Returning, however, will be of no use, because you are about to die." The expression on Qin Shi Huang's face shifted instantly. Had anyone else dared to speak such words to him, they would have been dragged out and executed on the spot. But having witnessed me achieve a breakthrough in mid-air with his own eyes, he dared not show the slightest disrespect and could only suppress his growing dread to ask me, "Immortal Master Lu, I am but 49 years of age, and my body has always been robust. Why do you say that my end is near?" I did not beat around the bush and addressed the issue directly. "You have been consuming medicinal elixirs for many years, have you not?" He admitted it, and I continued to expose the truth. "Those alchemists of yours have no genuine knowledge of pill refining. They merely toss red copper, black lead, sulfur, and all manner of debris into the furnace. They refine these into what they call elixirs, then boast that they are pills of immortality. These substances contain vast amounts of mercury. Consuming them long-term does nothing for your body, it only poisons you. If I am not mistaken, you have been taking them for 10 years. Though you may appear fine on the surface, your body is riddled with mercury. When it finally erupts, it will be like a dam collapsing under the force of a flood. When that day comes, even the gods will be unable to save you. Upon hearing this, Qin Shi Huang stood completely paralyzed. He remained frozen for a long moment, before it was clearly the fire qi attacking his heart, forcing the root of the illness out of his body. Qin Shi Huang spoke in a hurry, "I beg Immortal Lu to save me." As this plea escaped his lips, not a trace of his imperial dignity remained. I did not delay and acted immediately. With a trace of spiritual energy, I first slashed his wrist. Then I guided a bowl to collect the flowing blood. Following that, I tapped a finger between his eyebrows. I began to force the toxins within his body out bit by bit. Not long after, the bowl was filled with black blood. The blood was thick and congealed, a truly terrifying sight. Qin Shi Huang himself was startled, though at the same time the feeling of obstruction in his body eased significantly. I withdrew my hand and told him bluntly, "I have purged the toxins for you once. You must recuperate slowly for the rest. Drink some tea while I head to the vegetable garden to see if I should add anything else." He hurriedly cupped his hands in gratitude. "Many thanks to Immortal Lu for saving my life," as I turned and walked toward the garden without a second thought. Truth be told, even not expect this ancestral dragon to be tormented by pill toxins to such an extent. After I left, he sat down by himself to drink the tea. The result was that the moment he finished the first cup, his entire body convulsed on the ground in agony. For the tea was no ordinary beverage. It had immediately begun to cleanse his marrow and refine his physique. This emperor through the ages truly knew how to endure. He gritted his teeth tightly, refusing to let out a single sound, until impurities resembling black sludge began to seep out from his body layer by layer. Only then did he realize that I was not trying to harm him, but was instead helping him reconstruct his body. After he drank a few more cups and the impurities were purged entirely, he appeared to have instantly rejuvenated by over a decade. He became all the more convinced that he had encountered great fortune. He rushed off in a flurry to find me, even bowing respectfully to the black dog he encountered on the path. "Immortal dog, please forgive my earlier offenses. Do not hold them against me." The black dog heard this and wagged its tail so vigorously it nearly took flight. By the time Qin Shi Huang caught up to me, he immediately recounted the changes he had experienced. I glanced at him, feeling somewhat surprised myself. "It seems you have undergone a marrow cleansing and physique refinement." Seeing that Qin Shi Huang did not understand, I began to explain. Generally, to accelerate the speed of one's cultivation, and to reach higher levels of mastery, one must undergo the cleansing of the marrow and the tempering of the bones. You have now completed the preliminary phase, and henceforth, your path of martial cultivation shall be as smooth as a fish finding water. Qin Shi Huang was both astonished and overjoyed upon hearing this, offering his thanks in haste, though the black sludge coating his skin was so foul-smelling and sticky that even he found it repulsive. I gestured toward the waterfall behind us and commanded him to bathe while I went to fetch a set of robes for him. He acknowledged the order and hurried away, while I remained in the vegetable garden, gazing toward that strange small tree. Dozens of mystical fruits hung from its branches, within which faint silhouettes of dragons, phoenixes, and Qilin flickered. I considered plucking one for Qin Shi Huang, to extend his lifespan, but reconsidered, given that the toxins within his body had been purged and his marrow cleansed. As long as he refrains from consuming medicinal pills recklessly, living to 80 or 90 years is not difficult. There is no need to indulge him with such treasures. With that thought, I abandoned the idea and turned back toward the palace to retrieve the garments for the ancestral dragon. But as I drew near, I stopped in my tracks, stunned. After the cleansing of his tendons and bones, the ancestral dragon's physique was far more robust than I had anticipated, especially those defined 8-pack abdominal muscles. I clicked my tongue in silence. I truly would not have guessed. His foundation is indeed remarkably solid. Seeing my arrival, Qin Shi Huang immediately accepted the robes and quickly dressed, only then bowing to me with clasped hands. "Immortal Master Lu, I am truly grateful. I feel as though I possess inexhaustible strength within me, as if I have returned to the vigor of my youth." Observing him, a sudden curiosity struck me. Why not spar a little? Qin Shi Huang hurriedly shook his head. "How could I dare to display my meager tricks before you, Immortal Master?" I had no patience for his empty formalities. "Draw your sword. I wish to see the quality of your swordsmanship." Seeing the firmness in my demeanor, Qin Shi Huang no longer refused. "If that is the case, I request the Immortal Master to offer some guidance." Immediately, he drew his sword, his strikes fierce as a tiger, moving with immense speed. I raised my hand, manifesting a blade of pure spiritual energy, and moved to parry his attacks, engaging him in a dance of blades. A few moments later, I had a clear assessment. Qin Shi Huang's swordsmanship was, in truth, quite formidable. Placed within the Great Qin Empire, he would undoubtedly be considered a top-tier expert. Yet compared to a true master of the sword, he still lacked a certain depth of refinement. Thus, I traded blows with him while offering pointers. His killing intent was sufficient, but his technique lacked adaptability, so I held back once the lesson had concluded. "Your foundation is quite solid. I shall take you to the library pavilion to select a more formidable sword manual." Qin Shi Huang immediately cupped his hands in respect. "Many thanks, Immortal Master Lu." But just as we were about to depart, a strangely rich and intoxicating aroma drifted through the air. Both Qin Shi Huang and I swallowed our saliva simultaneously. Qin Shi Huang could not help but ask me, "Immortal Master Go, are you also capable of such culinary feats?" I answered with a stoic expression. I was the one who taught the chef. Qin Shi Huang exclaimed once more. Immortal Master Lu is truly remarkable, yet inwardly I felt a slight sense of unease. This wretched black dog is indeed a better cook than I am. Unfortunately, every dish it prepares is fragrant enough to stir one's ravenous hunger. Very well, let us eat first. Once we have finished, I shall take you on your way. Qin Shi Huang and I quickened our pace toward the kitchen, but upon reaching the door, the black dog stood upright and raised its paw to block our path. It then shoved me toward the door, barking incessantly. It even slammed the kitchen door shut right in front of my face. I stood outside with a darkened expression. This mutt was clearly afraid I would steal its culinary secrets, so I had no choice but to wait until the door finally opened. The black dog gestured with its paw, feigning a polite invitation for me to enter. I stepped inside to find the table already set. In the center sat a pot of stewed radishes, the aroma reaching an extreme level of intensity. I called out toward the courtyard, "It is time to eat." Hearing my voice, Qin Shi Huang entered the room and took his seat, and so 2 men and 1 dog sat together to share a meal. I had long grown accustomed to dining with a dog, but it was clear that Qin Shi Huang had never witnessed such a sight. As he picked at his food, he could not help but glance repeatedly at the black dog sitting beside him. The black dog held its bowl and chopsticks with practiced ease. Its movements from plucking the food to bringing it to its mouth were unnaturally fluid. Qin Shi Huang looked as though he had seen a ghost. He was surely wondering if a human soul resided within that canine frame, but the stewed radishes were simply too fragrant. He quickly set aside his wandering thoughts and focused on the meal. This pot of stewed radishes had indeed been simmered to perfection. The radish was tender and fully infused with flavor, and the broth was truly a masterpiece. Qin Shi Huang nodded repeatedly as he ate, unable to stop heaping praise upon the dish. Hearing the compliments, the black dog's tail wagged so hard it seemed it might take flight. It barked periodically, grinning with narrowed eyes as it served food to Qin Shi Huang. Surprisingly, Qin Shi Huang did not mind in the slightest. Whatever the black dog, however, as he ate, his expression suddenly shifted. It was as if a new surge of energy had awakened within him. This energy rampaged through his meridians, causing his face to flush crimson, and before long, steam began to rise from his entire body. I gripped his pulse, exclaiming, "Impressive. This pot of stewed radishes has actually infused him with a surge of true essence." Looking at him, I spoke, "Do not panic. I will teach you now how to guide this energy into your dantian. While it is but the most rudimentary technique for circulating energy, for Qin Shi Huang it is more than sufficient." I explained it to him twice, and he had already grasped the method. With a solemn expression, Qin Shi Huang said, "I am deeply grateful for your teachings, Immortal Lu." I waved my hand dismissively. "This cannot be considered a true inheritance. Continue eating, circulate your energy as you consume." And so, we spent half an hour on that meal, devouring the radishes and the broth until not a drop remained. Once finished, Black Ball went off to wash the dishes, while I sat there lost in thought. Qin Shi Huang sat cross-legged to the side, slowly refining that surge of true essence. 2 hours later, his complexion finally returned to normal. He had clearly gained control over this newfound power. Only then did Qin Shi Huang speak. "Immortal Lu, you mentioned earlier that you would assist me in selecting a sword technique." I was suddenly jolted back to reality, nearly forgetting the primary task. "Follow me to the library," I said, leading him directly to the 2nd floor of the Scripture Pavilion, arriving at the section for martial arts. This area contains profound martial arts. With your current foundation, you should make your selection from here. Qin Shi Huang nodded, his gaze sweeping across the shelves until it stopped on a yellowed ancient text. I pulled it out to examine it. 100-step flying sword shadow. I recognized this as the formidable technique of the Giguzi lineage, famed for its lethality, a single strike meant to kill. I looked up at him. "You certain you wish to learn this?" Qin Shi Huang nodded indeed. I proceeded to casually leaf through the book, and in just 2 or 3 minutes I had mastered it. Shortly thereafter I handed the book to Qin Shi Huang. "Study it now. If there is anything you do not understand, feel free to ask." Qin Shi Huang stood stunned. "Is it already finished?" I did not bother to explain, leaving him to his own astonishment. He dared not ask further and hurriedly opened the ancient text, reading with intense focus. After all, Qin Shi Huang had practiced the sword since childhood and possessed a solid foundation. He contemplated this 100-step flying sword for 2 full hours, and every obscure point he encountered he would ask me about one by one. I in turn readily provided him with detailed explanations. Once he fully grasped the technique, he began to practice on the spot. I stood by his side, taking the opportunity to refine his sword stance. For the Manhwa sword technique, the blade must strike like a dragon. You must first stabilize your posture before launching a rapid follow-up strike. As long as you can maintain a steady flow of energy, taking an enemy's head within 100 paces will be a simple feat. Under my guidance, Qin Shi Huang endured 3 more hours of grueling training, finally bringing the 100-pace flying sword to the introductory level. Although he was still far from being able to kill with it, the mere display of such technique was already enough to strike fear into any opponent. He clearly understood that an opportunity like this was rare, and leaving with only one sword technique would be a significant loss. He looked at me and directly voiced the burden that had weighed on his heart for so long, asking how one might achieve immortality. This was, after all, the one thing he could never let go of. Thus I asked him, "Are you inquiring about the elixir of immortality?" Qin Shi Huang nodded silently, saying nothing. I naturally understood what was weighing on his mind. Who does not desire a longer life? I am no exception. But true immortality is not as simple as it seems. The stories told in folk tales where one consumes a single immortal pill and gains eternal life are nothing more than idle fables. I replied calmly, immortality by its very nature is an act of defying the heavens. One must break through time and again, seizing longevity from the hands of the heavenly Tao. Only then is there a possibility of reaching that ultimate state. I have not yet achieved it myself, but I can certainly extend your lifespan. Having experienced this trial, as long as you do not consume reckless medicinal pills in the future, and provided you are not slain by another, living to 80 or 90 will not be an issue. Qin Shi Huang was stunned. In his era, reaching such an age was considered an exceptional longevity. He immediately bowed to me, saying, I thank Immortal Master Lu for bestowing upon me these extra decades of life. I opened my mouth, intending to tell him that this was not something I had bestowed, but the words reached my lips and I felt too lazy to explain further. I let him believe what he would and continued speaking. In short, relying on external objects to achieve immortality is far too difficult. If you truly wish to walk this path, the only reliable way is to cultivate. A spark of brilliance lit up Qin Shi Huang's eyes. How does one cultivate? I answered indifferently. I can teach you, but how much you comprehend depends entirely on yourself. He moved as if to kneel and pay his respects, but I raised my hand to steady him, saying, there is no need for such formalities. The first step of cultivation is to sense the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, though I do not know if such energy exists in your great Qin. For now, commit these fundamentals to memory. I then proceeded to explain the most fundamental principles of cultivation to him, detailing everything from the realms of power to the circulation of energy, speaking for a full half hour. Once the theoretical discourse concluded, I led him toward the section containing inscribed texts. This place holds the true foundation of cultivation. From the shelf I withdrew 2 volumes and handed them to him. The Art of Qi Refining and the Sword Manipulation Technique. These are the introductory manuals. How much you are able to comprehend depends entirely on your own capabilities. Qin Shi Huang accepted them with both hands and bowed solemnly. He then sat down and began to pour all his effort into memorizing the contents. However, cultivation manuals and sword forms are not at all the same. The more one reads, the more obscure and difficult the texts become. It was clear he was desperate to learn, yet he kept forgetting, as if some unseen force was deliberately suppressing him, making it nearly impossible for him to truly engrave the knowledge into his mind. By the time he had arduously memorized everything, his forehead was drenched in cold sweat. He wiped his brow and asked me, Immortal Master Lu, how much time do I have left? I glanced at the jade orb and replied, about an hour and a half. Qin Shi Huang let out a long sigh, clearly feeling that it was insufficient. Yet he knew that with the remaining time, attempting to learn anything else would be futile. Thus, he resolutely changed his question. Immortal Master Lu, I wish to ask you to calculate the destiny of the great Qin. I looked at him and said with gravity, are you certain you truly wish to hear this? Seeing Qin Shi Huang nod, I answered directly, in truth, I have told you before, not long after your second attempt to send Shufu to the east, you will perish, destined to live to 49. Qin Shi Huang's expression darkened instantly. But what concerned him more was evidently not the moment of his own demise, but rather what would become of the great Qin after he was gone. So he spoke, if I had not come here, what would have become of the great Qin after my death? Would the eternal empire crumble and fall into division once more? I was all too familiar with the answer to this question. With a calm voice I replied, after your death, Zhao Gao and Li Si will collude to forge your imperial decree. Zhao Gao will force Li Si to draft a fraudulent mandate, executing Fu Su and Meng Tian. They will keep your death a secret, and use salt all along the journey leading you back to Shanyang, ultimately supporting Hu Hai's ascension to the throne. Upon hearing this, Qin Shi Huang's hands began to tremble. And what happened after that? I continued, stating that Hu Hai would embark on a path of wholesale slaughter. Nearly all of your children would be executed, half of your court officials would perish, and within roughly 3 years, the great Qin would fall. Qin Shi Huang was completely stunned, his face turning deathly pale at the mention of 3 years. It was evident that he could not possibly accept this truth. I knew there was one other matter that weighed most heavily on his mind, so I added another statement. But rest assured, from your era onwards, this land shall never truly lose the concept of unification, for even in times of chaos, it shall always eventually merge back into one. Hearing this, Qin Shi Huang finally breathed a sigh of relief, then pressed me further, asking, then who was it that destroyed the Qin? I answered in a detached tone. Heroes rose up in unison, but in the end it was Liu Bang who entered Xianyang first, establishing the Han dynasty. Qin Shi Huang fell silent for a moment, his gaze gradually shifting. He was no ordinary man. I knew that once these words reached his ears, they would certainly not be in vain. Thus, I decisively took it a step further. I have one more thing I wish to show you. My divine sense left my body, projecting an image into the air based on my memories. The mountains, rivers, and vast seas of the continent appeared bit by bit. Qin Shi Huang stared at the aerial depiction in a trance. This, I said, looking at him, in truth, the world is vast. The great Qin is merely but a small part of it. Beyond the seas and to the west, there are vast territories. This is called a world map. Look closely. Commit this to memory. Qin Shi Huang stared intently at the image, his eyes suddenly burning with fervor. All of these places can become part of the map of Huaxia. I immediately sought to distance myself from such claims. I said nothing of the sort. I am merely showing you the shape of the world. Yet Qin Shi Huang wore the expression of one who understood everything. Because he was convinced that I was revealing the secrets of the heavens, and that if I were to admit to it directly, I might suffer a backlash from the heavens. He bowed solemnly toward me. Many thanks, Immortal Master Lu, for your guidance. If I were to fail to live up to these expectations, what would the unification of the 6 states even matter? I desire to lead the Iron Cavalry of the Great Qin to conquer an even greater world. I wish for the map of Huaxia to extend to the very ends of the world. Let the sun, the moon, and the mountains remain eternal. Let the glory of Huaxia endure forever. As he spoke these words, he paused abruptly, his eyes growing increasingly brilliant. Immortal Master Lu, I also wish for every citizen of Huaxia to be able to practice martial arts and cultivate the Tao. If it cannot be achieved in this lifetime, then we shall pass it to the 2nd generation. Then the 3rd, the 4th, generation after generation, the legacy will continue. I wish to forge a vast immortal dynasty bit by bit. I wish for a great era where 10,000 immortals come to pay tribute. Hearing these words, even I was left momentarily stunned. The ambition for an immortal dynasty and a grand convergence of 10,000 immortals. It must be said that this ancestral dragon truly possessed a daring vision. Yet it was precisely because of this that I held him in even higher regard. Only with such overwhelming ambition is one worthy of the title the Eternal First Emperor. With that, I nodded and replied, "Very well, since you harbor such a grand aspiration, I shall lend you my support." Immediately, I gestured with my hand, and a rare fruit from the vegetable garden flew directly into my grasp. I placed it inside a wooden box and personally pressed it into Qin Shi Huang's hands. If there comes a day in the future when your cultivation reaches its limit and you can no longer advance, and your lifespan is nearing its end, consume this fruit. It may not grant you true immortality, but it should be sufficient to extend your life. Qin Shi Huang accepted the wooden box, his grip tightening visibly. I thanked Immortal Master Lu, and then, utilizing the remaining time, I outlined the existing flaws within the Great Qin for him, advising him on matters of public livelihood, talent recruitment, and reforms. I had said all that could be said, and the countdown was steadily approaching 0. Qin Shi Huang still had much he wished to ask, but time had run out. As his final breath faded, his silhouette began to dissipate. Before he vanished entirely, he stared fixedly at me. Immortal Master Lu, I will certainly not break my promise. Even if it cannot be achieved in this life, I shall ensure that Huaxia continues to march forward for generations to come. As his words fell, his entire being vanished completely. I stood in place, gazing into the void, feeling a sudden sense of anticipation. Perhaps this ancestral dragon truly can carve out such a path. I believe in you. I wish you success. With that said, I lowered my gaze toward the jade orb. It had, as expected, begun to glow, signaling the reward of the first stage of key refining. By now, I had grown accustomed to this. Crossing my legs, I formed the seal and circulated the primordial refinement technique. Once again, I absorbed this surge of cultivation base. I returned to that boundless void, enduring the long and arduous process of refinement. Only when the fusion was complete was I cast back into reality. As I opened my eyes, the jade bead displayed the words, 4th level of chi refining. The effect of the pupils revealed the trajectory of the celestial spiritual orbit. A single glance was enough. Those below the 3rd level of chi refining were rendered unconscious instantly. I could not help but mutter in a low voice. This effect is becoming increasingly excessive. To be this powerful while merely in the chi refining stage, I can only imagine how terrifying the primordial realm truly is. Instinctively, I expanded my divine sense, yearning to glimpse beyond the mountain once more, but alas, the restriction remained absolute, and I was forced to give up. At this moment, the jade bead shone again, rewarding me with 2 heavens-observing mirrors. Their function was simple and brutal. To peer into the myriad worlds without being detected by others, I was instantly invigorated. This is truly an exquisite treasure. Being trapped here, the one thing I lack is a set of eyes. Yet as I held the mirror, I struggled for a long while without finding how to activate it. After half an hour of fumbling, the mirror suddenly flickered with light. In the blink of an eye, the entire surface of the mirror was filled with a round face. I was startled. This face was far too close. The entire mirror was occupied by nothing but skin. Instinctively, I reached out and gave the mirror a light swipe, hoping to shrink the image, and to my surprise, it actually worked. Immediately after, more scenes unfolded. A magnificent imperial palace, an ornate chaise longue, and a woman lying lazily upon it. The first thing I noticed were her legs, long and fair. Looking upward, her delicate collarbones and slender waist revealed a figure that was truly beyond reason. I stared in a daze. This was not a beauty that belonged to the mortal realm. If one were to say Yuyan was extremely beautiful, this woman was on an entirely different level. A thought crossed my mind. What kind of emperor had the skill to raise such a beauty? At that very moment, a young maid with twin braids hurried in, carrying a plate of lychees. With a playful giggle, she brought them to the woman's lips. When she addressed her as Your Majesty, I finally realized. As it turns out, she was not a concubine, but the empress herself. As she ate the lychees, her voice was so gentle and soft that my ears began to tingle. In my heart, only one thought remained: this woman is absolutely divine. After a short while, she rose. On the paper, she first wrote, "The sun and moon do not determine fate. Man can conquer heaven." But regrettably, her handwriting was insufferable. After practicing, she grew frustrated with herself and decisively wrote down the 3 characters, Mu Chen Yu, before beginning to mutter in a low voice about how unsightly her own calligraphy was. It was then I learned her name was Mu Chen Yu and that she was an empress. Immediately after, the perspective within the mirror shifted as if reversing to reveal her history. I gradually came to understand her origins. During the Great Yu imperial succession struggle, her elder brothers sought to trade her to appease the prime minister, but she directly turned against them. Since they wanted to force her hand, she decided to stage a rebellion. As it turned out, this gamble actually allowed her to carve a bloody path to the throne, after which the various factions of Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism emerged, declaring that a woman could not rule as emperor, but she silenced the lot of them by crushing those titans into submission. From that moment on, no one under the heavens dared to say she was unworthy. Thereafter, she began to expand her dominion, and in the span of a mere 2 years, she swallowed more than 100 nations, leaving only the remaining stubborn obstacles: East Sea Longyang, the 3,000 isles of Nanchao, the burying emperor sands of the western desert, and the vast desolate lands of the North Sea. Against these, she had yet to truly make her move. As I watched this, a female general suddenly charged into the palace. "Your Majesty, it is dire. A dragon has appeared in Longyang." I immediately perked up, finally sensing a new development. Mu Chenyu sat bolt upright instantly, and as the general Bai Yi reported that a dragon had indeed manifested in East Sea Longyang, she produced a projection orb which clearly displayed a 1,000-foot golden dragon. Mu Chenyu's expression turned solemn, yet she did not mobilize her armies immediately, instead ordering Bai Yi to continue monitoring the East Sea, while she personally wrote the 2 characters Longyang on paper and drew a cross through them. It was evident she had marked them for vengeance. I had hoped to see more of how the situation in Longyang would unfold, intending to wait until she had gathered more information before she unsheathed her blade. Instead, a young maid suddenly tucked a blanket over her legs. I rolled my eyes, thinking this entirely unnecessary. Could a woman of her cultivation level truly fear the cold? I couldn't help but mutter a few words of annoyance, and to my dismay, the scenes I wished to see vanished completely. I paced back and forth, clutching the heaven mirror in contemplation, finding it increasingly similar to watching a drama. The pity is that this broken mirror offers no way to change the perspective. Every image remains fixed solely upon Mu Chenyu. As she slept, I could only watch her. It was truly tedious. I decided to simply drift off to sleep myself. When I awoke, the first thing I did was gaze into the mirror, only to discover that she had already finished bathing. She had even donned her final layer of clothing. I immediately felt a heavy sense of loss. Had I known, I would not have slept earlier, but before I could wallow in regret, she lowered the curtains, and the image in the mirror began to blur bit by bit, until it vanished entirely. I found this heaven's mirror increasingly bizarre. For the next several days, I dedicated myself to studying it until I finally grasped a few patterns. As long as Mu Chenyu is asleep, the mirror remains dark, and it only illuminates once she awakens, much like a machine being powered on. What is even more preposterous is that despite watching her for so long, I have never once seen her practice cultivation diligently, yet she possesses terrifying strength. From where exactly does this power originate? The more I pondered, the more curious I became, yet what irritated me most was that whenever she bathed, a strange energy shielded her, leaving absolutely nothing to be seen. I stared at the pitch-black surface of the mirror and could only mutter, "Must you even guard against a hypocrite like me?" In the days that followed, I occasionally checked the heavens mirror, though most of my time was devoted to cultivation. After all, I had only just reached the 4th layer of chi refining. The path to immortality is long, and I cannot spend every day gazing at a beauty. Seasons changed, and years passed in the blink of an eye. 6 years had gone by. That day, as I checked the mirror as per my routine, I observed Mu Chenyu with a gloomy expression, her hand clutching a report tightly, her eyes filled with cold malice. "Longyang, you truly seek death. This sovereign has not moved against you, yet you dare to come ashore and devour people first." Hearing this, I immediately grew alert. Looking closer at the contents of the report, I saw that a purple-gold evil dragon had emerged from the water, devouring an entire village in a mere 3 gulps, claiming the lives of over 100 people in an instant. For years, Mu Chenyu had kept a close watch on Longyang, but that place was too deeply concealed, and the clues were always scarce. Now that he has climbed atop her, she will naturally suffer this indignity no longer. Swiftly, she summoned the civil and military officials, along with the great masters of the Confucian, Buddhist, and Taoist sects, to the Great Hall. Long Vin has begun to devour human beings. I intend to strike at Long Vin. Speak now if anyone has an objection. The Confucian sage was the first to speak. Long Vin has swallowed our people, and after many days, there has been no explanation. He deserves to be annihilated, the head of the Buddhist sect replied, pressing his palms together. This humble monk agrees. The Taoist sect leader also nodded. We may go to war. At this moment, a civil official stepped forward. Long Ving is unfathomably powerful. I beg your majesty to observe the situation for a while longer. Mu Chenyu did not even bother to lift her eyelids. With a mere flick of her sleeve, she issued the command for the 100 kingdoms to prepare for war. With 10,000 armies arrayed in battle formation, she declared that the eastern expedition would commence in 2 months. Those who dared to object would not be spared. Her words cast a deathly silence over the entire imperial court. Everyone understood that this woman was not negotiating. She was issuing a decree, and as I watched from the mirror, my blood began to boil with anticipation. After trailing this for 6 years, I have finally waited for a great battle. 2 months passed in the blink of an eye. On that day, I specifically went out to the vegetable garden. I brought back a large watermelon, set up a chair, and sat squarely before the mirror. The black dog shuffled over to sit beside me, and I split the melon in 2, giving it 1/2. The black dog clutched the melon and began to dig in, its tail wagging frantically. I pressed my hand down, signaling it to be quiet. The main event has begun. In the mirror, the Grand Army has already mobilized. At Mu Chenyu's command, the cultivators of the 100 Kingdoms marched to the front lines. The practitioners of the Confucian, Buddhist, and Taoist sects followed, closing in on the eastern sea. They covered the sky so densely that from a distance they resembled a dark cloud descending upon the surface of the ocean. Bai Yi, who had guarded the eastern sea for 6 years, had long been driven to the brink of madness. The moment he saw Mu Chenyu appear, his eyes turned bloodshot. "Empress, you have finally arrived." Mu Chenyu replied with only one sentence: "Long Ving devoured my people. Today he shall be utterly destroyed." Following this, the great army advanced, sweeping through the front lines in a single stroke. Outside of Longveen lay a perilous sea region. Mysterious turtles, demonic whales, 9-headed serpents, and 8-clawed monsters all stood guard there like a natural impenetrable screen. The Confucian sage, the head of the Buddhist sect, the 3 individuals carved a path forward directly, striking down anyone who dared to obstruct them with a single finger. They cut through the waves, turning the seawater a deep crimson red. Once they surged past that treacherous expanse of sea, Long Wang was finally cornered to his death. Meanwhile, to the south of the 3,000 islands, countless island lords stood at a distance, observing the spectacle. If Long Wang were to be defeated, they knew they would likely be the next targets. Yet there was no unity among them. They could only shrink back and watch the tragedy unfold. In the moment the great army surrounded the stronghold, a violent gale suddenly erupted from the center of Long Wang's domain. A golden dragon soared directly into the heavens. Its massive form stretched across the sky so vast that its tail remained unseen. The moment the dragon appeared, it unleashed a thunderous roar toward Mu Chenyu. "Empress of the Great Yu, do you truly believe you are invincible in this mortal realm?" Mu Chenyu tilted her head upward to gaze at the beast. "Is your bloodline not rather impure?" The more he was scrutinized, the more the Dragon King's rage flared, yet Mu Chenyu remained unmoved, offering him only one choice: surrender, die. The Dragon King attempted to justify himself. "What sin have I, Long Wang, committed? To be hungry and consume sustenance is merely the nature of dragons." As these words left his mouth, Bai Qi was instantly overcome with fury, his battle intent surging like a tidal wave. "Empress, allow this subordinate to execute this deviant beast." Mu Chenyu nodded, and Bai Qi immediately launched his assault. As the two clashed, the high heavens shattered layer by layer from the force of their impact. The void began to collapse as the two fought for 300 rounds. Ultimately, Bai Qi remained a step behind in cultivation. He was gradually suppressed by the Dragon King. Seeing her subordinate fall into a disadvantageous position, the Confucian saint, the Buddhist abbot, and the Taoist master struck simultaneously, engaging in a 4-against-1 battle. After fighting for an hour, the Dragon King could no longer hold his ground. His colossal draconic body crashed into the East Sea, stirring up waves 10,000 feet high. The moment the Dragon King fell, Mu Chenyu gestured with a wave of her hand. The 10,000 soldiers surged forward to invade Long Wan in unison. Yet, only half an hour later, reports flooded in from the frontline scouts. There were no dragons in Long Wan, a single one, leaving even me, standing behind the mirror, stunned. Mu Chenyu clearly faltered for a moment as well. Long Wan was filled with traces of dragon activity, yet the true dragon was nowhere to be found. A moment later, her expression shifted violently. As if she had suddenly grasped the truth, she stepped onto the surface of the sea and reached out to drag the dragon's carcass upward. She held it in the palm of her hand, observing it intently. Immediately after, she clenched her 5 fingers. The dragon corpse instantly disintegrated into motes of light. At this very moment, a paper crane descended from the sky. She reached out to catch it, revealing a projection of the imperial preceptor within. Myriad dragons have suddenly appeared at the imperial capital. The city's protective formation is on the verge of collapse. The leader, who calls himself the Dragon King, is someone we fear cannot be withstood. As the words faded, the paper crane vanished. The expressions of Bai Qi and the others shifted drastically. The imperial capital and the East Sea are separated by too vast a distance. To return now would be far too late. Someone cried out in despair, claiming that the Great Yu was finished. The head of the Buddhist sect softly chanted a mantra, as if resigned to fate, while others muttered, "We told you not to fight, yet you would not listen. A fine mess this has become." Upon hearing this, Mu Chenyu merely replied with 2 words: "Too noisy." She then flicked her sleeve, and an image immediately manifested in the void. It depicted the tragic state of the imperial capital. At this moment, 10,000 dragons had entered the city, with corpses littering the streets. The true Dragon King stood high above, laughing maniacally at the Empress. "You have arrived just in time. I wanted you to witness with your own eyes how I devour this imperial capital. In the future, you shall guard the Long Lawn, while I sit upon the throne of the Great Yu." Only now did she fully grasp the situation. This beast had long since orchestrated this trap, using fake dragons to reveal themselves and consume villages to provoke a war, all to lure Mu Chenyu and the elite of the Great Yu to the East Sea, while he led his myriad dragons to strike at the heart of the capital. This scheme was truly vicious. Even Mu Chenyu had to raise a hand to rub her temple. "Long Luan Dragon King, is it? You are quite capable. It seems this empress must employ that technique. I only hope the consequences are not too severe." As she finished speaking, her hands immediately formed a seal. The following moment, the world suddenly plunged into darkness, not the gloom of a storm but true absolute blackness. Then an avatar of indescribable scale rose from the ground, reaching into the infinite heights. That silhouette appeared identical to Mu Chenyu, yet it was so vast that it transcended my comprehension. It spanned across heaven and earth, looking down upon all living beings. My scalp immediately went numb, for through the reflection in the mirror I saw with horror that Mu Chenyu's face had manifested outside the very planet itself. This was no mere manifestation of a technique. It was as if she herself were physically pressing against the outer heavens. A moment later, she reached a hand down from the void of the cosmos, lunging directly toward the imperial capital. The Dragon King, who just a moment ago was laughing in arrogant triumph, found himself firmly ensnared in her palm the very next instant. His entire draconic form immediately stiffened. He could not even utter a single coherent sentence. His head was crushed instantly, yet that colossal hand did not stop, continuing its sweep across the skies of the imperial capital. Every true dragon that had entered the city was obliterated the moment she grasped them. They were denied even the dignity of a struggle. Within mere minutes, 10,000 dragons were utterly exterminated. The entire imperial capital was delivered from the brink of death, while the side of Longluan descended into a deathly silence. At that moment, I was truly left stupefied. How could one even fight such a force? We were simply not on the same level of existence. This woman usually did nothing but eat and sleep. She only occasionally reviewed scrolls and petitions, and I had never once seen her focus on cultivation. Yet, in the blink of an eye, she could reach out from the depths of the starry sky and snuff out 10,000 dragons from across the void. For the first time, I realized with absolute clarity that I was truly weak as a mere ant. Following that battle, the world was shaken, and everyone knew that Mu Chenchu existed on a realm entirely her own. As for me, I had completely lost the desire to watch the excitement from the sidelines. I withdrew the mirror and turned away to endure bitter cultivation. The black dog was also terrified out of its wits. With a single howl, it bolted into the library, desperate to bolster its own knowledge. Yet not even 3 minutes later, it lay sprawled on the floor, fast asleep. Time flowed by, and another 4 years passed. During these 4 years, I poured my all into the Hunyuan refinement technique, yet the fifth layer of the refinement stayed, until one day the familiar, frenzied barking of the black dog suddenly erupted from the direction of the waterfall. I snapped my eyes open, immediately recalling 10 years ago when Shuang had accidentally stumbled into this place. It had barked just like that. Could it be that someone has entered again? I intended to project my divine sense to investigate first, but at the last moment I suppressed the urge. Going to see for myself would be far more interesting. With that, I rose to my feet and rushed directly toward the waterfall. Upon arriving, I saw a small boat anchored before the waterfall. Standing at the stern was a young woman, still clutching a wooden oar. She wore a simple white robe with her hair cascading over her shoulders, tied only by a golden silk ribbon. Her entire being was as pristine as snow. Her features were incredibly delicate, so beautiful that I was left momentarily stunned. She was still softly humming a melody, clearly having been sailing toward the sea only to be suddenly swept away to this place. She saw the waterfall, then the black dog, and finally caught sight of me rushing over. Her entire body froze in place. She scanned me up and down several times with her large, intelligent eyes. "Where is this place?" I opened my mouth to provide her with an answer. The Hunyuan realm, Novice Village. She clearly did not understand. She stared at me intensely for a few more moments, then suddenly broke into a laugh. "I was originally at sea, and in the blink of an eye, I was brought here. You must be an immortal, aren't you?" I shook my head. "You can only stay here for at most 1 day. After 1 day you may return, so there is no need for panic." Upon hearing this, she became even more excited, her eyes shining with brilliance. "You must be an immortal," I was about to explain. But she did not listen at all. She tapped her feet lightly against the side of the boat, and her body surged forward, propelled by her own momentum. She actually intended to engage me in a spar. However, before she could even reach me, the black dog intercepted her. The dog mistook her advance for an ambush, and with a sudden leap, it delivered a swift kick directly at her. With a loud splash, the young lady tumbled into the water, looking entirely bedraggled like a drowned chicken. She surfaced, her small lips pouting, clearly furious. "Come here." She once again glided onto the water's surface, her hands weaving in motion, executing the techniques of Peach Blossom Island. The orchid-gathering, point-striking hand. The moves were indeed elegant, but the black dog cared not for her grace, delivering yet another kick. With another splash, she fell into the water once again. This time, refusing to yield, she launched herself into the air again, unleashing both the orchid-gathering point-striking hand and the falling petal divine sword palm simultaneously. The shadow of her palms filled the air like falling flower petals, scattered and chaotic. The display was truly intimidating, yet the black dog simply raised its paw and kicked, watching as she was about to fall into the water for the 3rd time. I flicked my fingertips, sending a surge of spiritual energy to coil around her, pulling her directly from the water. She was drenched from head to toe, her hair dripping with moisture. Her white robes clung to her frame, only serving to accentuate her delicate features, as pure and elegant as a white flower amidst the rain. This time she did not show anger, but merely stared intently at me. "I have never seen that technique of yours before," I said, flicking another stream of spiritual energy that twisted the water ahead into a whirlpool. "This is known as spiritual energy." She immediately drew close, resembling a curious little fox. "What exactly is spiritual energy?" "It is refined from the spiritual essence of the heavens and earth." Upon hearing this, her smile only grew more assured. She insisted, "You are no mere immortal," leaving me at a loss for how to retort. She observed me closely for a long while before suddenly asking in a clear voice, "Immortal, what is your name?" "Lu Zhou." "Then I shall call you Great Emperor Lu Zhou." I was nearly rendered speechless by her remark. "What sort of title is that?" She feigned solemnity. "I have been reading many legends of gods and immortals lately. Your aura clearly possesses the qualities of a great emperor." I hurriedly waved my hand. "Do not flatter me so casually." Seeing my strong reaction, she laughed even more merrily. Very well, Great Emperor Lu Chu. My name is Huang Rong. Upon hearing that name, I understood immediately. It was no wonder she possessed such a disposition, as nimble and mischievous as she was naturally cunning. Huang Rong looked down and finally realized she was soaked through, so she extended a hand toward me. Lend me a set of robes. I will return them once they are dry. After a moment of contemplation, I handed her a set of Taoist robes that Yuyan had worn once before. To my surprise, as soon as she took them, she held them to her nose and sniffed. This carries the scent of a woman. Is this your wife's? I was stunned. Her nose was far too sharp. Was there not a young lady here before? Having worn it only once, Huang Rong let out a soft exclamation, yet she asked nothing more. Emboldened by this, she pushed her luck further. My hair is already damp. Would it be convenient if I took a bath as well? I led her to the hot spring chamber and closed the door, leaving her to soak in private. I had initially assumed she would be like Jiang Yuyan, bathing briefly before emerging, but I had underestimated how unorthodox this young woman's natural talent truly was. She had barely been inside for a moment before she sensed the peculiarities of the spring. She began to circulate her cultivation technique on the spot to absorb its essence, and in less than the time it takes to burn an incense stick, she had broken through both her governing and conception vessels, along with the entirety of her 8 extraordinary meridians. When she burst out of the room, she looked as though she had been reborn. Her skin was fairer, and her aura had become remarkably refined. She ran toward me with great excitement, droplets of water still clinging to her hair. All my meridians are opened. I reached out to examine her pulse, and it was indeed as she claimed. I could not help but marvel in my heart. Such talent is truly formidable. At this rate, it was entirely possible that she could actually defeat Huang Yaoshi upon her return. As expected, her very next words were, "This is wonderful. Once I return home, I shall give father a sound thrashing." I was left amused by her declaration. Truly a paragon of filial piety, I remarked, but she defended herself with bold logic. Who told him to constantly restrict me? If I do not teach him a lesson, I will never be able to swallow this bitterness. Having said this, she puffed out her chest with a look of immense satisfaction. I had only glanced at her casually, but I was forced to quickly avert my gaze. Though she appeared to be only 17 or 18, her figure was far from immature. The Taoist robes could barely contain her frame. Moreover, she was incredibly quick-witted and mischievous. Her tongue was as sweet as honey. With every other sentence, she addressed me as Great Emperor Lu Chu. While I refused to acknowledge it aloud, I had to admit to myself, that title certainly had a pleasant ring to it. Huang Rong quickly patted her chest to show her sincerity. You have aided me, and I must repay your kindness. I shall prepare a meal for you. I guarantee it is a taste you will never forget for the rest of your life. I agreed without a moment's hesitation. I was well aware of Huang Rong's culinary skills. That was her greatest specialty. She first asked if I had any chicken, duck, fish, or meat. I spread my hands helplessly. Here, there is only fish. She rolled her eyes, her gaze. Is there not still a hound left? The black hound's fur stood on end, and it barked wildly at her. Huang Rong immediately laughed and waved her hand. I was only joking. She then stared at the black hound for a long time, suddenly finding it quite interesting. You are so dark, yet you possess such an imposing air. How about I call you Black Emperor from now on? The corners of my mouth twitched upon hearing this, while the black hound was overjoyed, its tail wagging frantically. I had no choice but to remind her that I had heard that name before. Huang Rong, however, did not care at all. What is there to fear about sharing a name? As long as you are majestic enough, you are the Black Emperor. Upon hearing this, the black hound was even more pleased, nearly tilting its chin toward the sky, though in my heart I still remembered it was just a black hound. This name could at most be considered a nickname she had bestowed upon it. Following this, Huang Rong headed into the kitchen. I went to the pond to catch fish, and she went to the garden to pick vegetables. Upon entering the vegetable garden, she was struck dumb. Peas, green peppers, and tomatoes grew throughout the garden. They grew regardless of the season, not to mention the strange medicinal trees and exotic fruit trees laden with dragon phoenix and kilin fruits. Huang Rong stood in the garden for quite a while before slowly gathering the vegetables she needed. The black hound followed her the entire time, barking incessantly with a look that suggested it was actively participating. In truth, I knew it was merely showing off. This vegetable garden was normally tended to by the hound itself. By the time it came to washing and chopping the vegetables, the black hound was even more spirited, sometimes reaching out a paw, other times peering into the pot, clearly wanting to offer its guidance. Huang Rong was left bewildered by its antics, yet she paid it no mind, focusing solely on preparing her dishes. Not long after, half an incense stick of time had passed, and the various dishes were placed upon the table. Braised fish, stir-fried cabbage, stewed eggplant, and grilled chives. Even their presentation was a level more refined than the black hound's efforts. The black hound watched from the side, famished, its saliva nearly dripping. Once the meal began, it could only be described as sweeping away the clouds. Between myself, the black hound, and Huang Rong, not even 2/4 of an hour had passed before every scrap on the table had been devoured. This time I was truly impressed and convinced. Huang Rong's culinary skills were indeed at the pinnacle. The black hound was capable as well, but compared to her, it was ultimately a level behind. After the meal, Huang Rong happily went to wash the dishes. I watched her back, suddenly overcome with the urge to tease her. The techniques you practice are the orchid fuchsia hand, the falling petal divine sword palm, and the flicking finger divine skill, are they not? Huang Rong turned back, her expression one of utter astonishment. Great Emperor Lu Chu, how could you possibly know of these? I smiled faintly. Would you be interested in learning something even more profound? I had assumed she would be tempted, yet to my surprise, she did not even hesitate and shook her head directly. I was the one stunned this time. I do not enjoy martial arts, I only wish to play. Even on Peach Blossom Island, it was only because my father forced me that I studied. Otherwise, I would never have had the patience for it, she said with a sigh. Such innate talent is truly enough to make one die of envy. As soon as she finished washing the dishes, she grabbed the black dog and ran outside. Great Emperor Lu Chu, I am going for a stroll to see if I can catch some birds to prepare a different dish for you. However, before she even reached the door, her legs suddenly went weak, and she collapsed to the ground. Great Emperor Lu Chu, I am so hot, she cried. I immediately reached out to check her pulse. After examining her for a moment, I finally understood. The meal she had consumed earlier was far too chaotic. The ingredients from the vegetable garden and the fish pond each possessed different spiritual properties, and the moment they entered her mouth, they transformed into true qi. While she had been able to barely endure it before, these bursts of true qi were now erupting simultaneously, wreaking havoc within her body. At this moment, Huangrong's entire body was trembling as sweat poured from her face and neck flushed crimson. She gripped my sleeves tightly, gasping, Great Emperor Lu Chu, I am so hot, and even began to tear at her own robes. I knew that if this continued, her meridians would shatter. Without a word, I scooped her up and strode toward my room. The black dog, sensing the urgency of the situation, became frantic. It followed closely behind, but as soon as I entered the room, I turned and locked the door tight, ignoring its incessant barking outside. Inside the room, Huangrong's consciousness had begun to blur under the onslaught of the rampaging true qi. Great Emperor Lu Chu, Wronger is so hot, she murmured. I laid her down beside the bed and she immediately threw herself into my arms. As her arms wound tightly around me, I could not help but blurt out, is this because your true qi is in disarray, or did you consume something else entirely? Despite my words, my hands did not hesitate for a second. I first struck her pressure points and turned her around, forcing her into a cross-legged sitting position with her back toward me, after which I loosened her belt, revealing her upper back. As her snow white back was unveiled before my eyes, I hurriedly suppressed my distracting thoughts and pressed my palms against her, channeling my spiritual energy into her body to begin clearing those unruly currents of true qi. The process was far from brief. She was drenched in sweat, her skin flushed turning crimson, with wisps of white steam rising continuously from her body. After a full hour had passed, I finally managed to untangle the chaotic mess of energy. I proceeded to release her acupoints. The moment she turned around and realized her upper body was largely exposed, the entire room seemed to tremble under the force of her scream. You rogue. Still staring. She scrambled in a panic to cover herself, though her frantic attempts provided little to no effect. I had no choice but to commit to the role, feigning a stoic composure. Do not panic. I am in the midst of saving you. In the eyes of a physician, there is no distinction between genders. Huangrong glared at me fiercely, her face so flushed it looked as though it might bleed. Do you truly expect me to believe that? I did not rush to leave, for the task remained unfinished. Although I had successfully forced those erratic surges of true energy into a single stream, the sheer volume remained overwhelming. If left unrefined, she would undoubtedly face grave consequences. Thus I cautioned her, cease your struggling. That surge of energy remains volatile within you. If we do not stabilize it, your abdomen will become dangerously distended. Huangrong was stunned for a moment, then lowered her head to sense her condition. Finding her belly indeed distended, she asked, then what must be done? I replied with grave seriousness, I must take one further step. I must compress your true energy into pure spiritual power. She gritted her teeth, I wish to put on my robes first. I shook my head. You cannot. Soon your body temperature will rise even further, and your robes will only hinder the process. Though she was overwhelmed with humiliation, she understood the gravity of the situation and ultimately relented. Very quickly, she turned her back to me once more and sat upright. I pressed my palms against her back, channeling my spiritual power inward bit by bit. This time the process was far more efficient. In less than half an incense stick's time, the massive surge of energy within her dantian had been forcibly refined into streams of spiritual power. As I withdrew my hands, Huangrong gazed at herself in utter astonishment. She flicked her finger slightly, and a faint spiritual radiance danced upon her fingertips. She then waved her hand, and the table and chairs were effortlessly lifted into the air. Exhilarated, she leaped up and executed the Manhwa acupuncture technique on the spot, followed by the jade flute sword technique, with power dozens of times. Once this young lady returns to the Southern Song dynasty, I fear she will be able to roam the world unchallenged. I stood up to head outside, casually offering her a word of advice. Ensure your Taoist robes are properly fastened before you step out. However, the moment I crossed the threshold, a piercing scream erupted from behind me. Evidently, it was only then that she fully processed her recent state of undress. When she finally emerged, her face remained flushed and she dared not meet my gaze. I offered her some comfort, saying, what is done is done. You may simply regard me as an old physician. She lowered her head and gave a soft, quiet response, after which she fell silent. After a long while, Huangrong spoke in a low voice, Great Emperor Lu Chu, though I now possess spiritual power, the original mental cultivation techniques of Peach Blossom Island do not seem compatible with this new energy. I wish to seek your guidance. How can I circulate this power more fluidly? Upon hearing this, I immediately understood that this girl had developed an interest in the path of immortality. I motioned for her to follow me as I led her to the second floor of the library, walking straight toward the section marked with the can character. I pulled a manual on key refinement from the shelf and handed it to her. This mental cultivation manual will assist you in circulating your spiritual power and absorbing the spiritual essence of heaven and earth. Take it and study it first, I added, offering a stern warning. Remember, the can section contains only ancient texts pertaining to immortality cultivation. The Qian section houses martial arts manuals, while the Kun section holds volumes concerning dual cultivation. Do not wander into the other sections, remain obediently in the can area to read. Huangrong blinked, offering a light-hearted smile. Understood, my thanks, great Emperor Lu Chu. Clutching the book, she scurried inside. It must be said, Huangrong's aptitude is truly exceptional. Whether it be martial arts or cultivation techniques, she learns with incredible speed, grasping complex concepts with ease. A single explanation is all she requires. She read the Qi refinement manual from beginning to end, then questioned me on several key points regarding the circulation of spiritual power. Once she had fully grasped the fundamentals, she immediately picked up the sword control technique and the fireball technique. She continued her studies with the Five Thunders mental cultivation method. She was completely engrossed, reading from sunset as the moon rose high into the dead of night, until at last the horizon began to brighten with the coming dawn. She still could not bring herself to set the book in her hands aside. To her, these contents were nothing less than the unveiling of a new horizon, far surpassing the martial arts of Peach Blossom Island, belonging to an entirely different tier of existence. For the first time in her life, such an intense thirst for knowledge had emerged, though she regretted that her time remaining here was ultimately limited. She pored over the books until midnight, only to suddenly realize that I was nowhere to be found on the second floor, and so she carried the books with her, wandering through several of the larger sections. She first approached the C section, discovering that, as expected, they contained the martial arts secret manuals she was already familiar with. She flipped through a few at random before making her way to the K section. She casually pulled out an ancient volume with yellowed covers, but after reading only 2 pages, her face flushed a deep crimson. She hastily shoved the book back, not daring to look at it any further. As for the other areas, she dared not explore them recklessly. In the end, she clutched her books and hurried off to find me. With so little time remaining, why don't you let great Emperor Lu Zhou personally guide you? I glanced at the countdown within the jade bead, 1 minute and 53 seconds. Indeed, there was not much time left. Huangrong was clearly even more anxious than I was. Having only just come into contact with cultivation, she feared that after returning she would tread the wrong path without anyone to guide her, and thus she wanted to absorb as much as possible while she was still here, correcting every flaw before her departure. I seek your guidance, I nodded. Very well, let us begin. She immediately unleashed a strike, her figure flickering as swiftly as a bolt of lightning. The first technique Huangrong initiated was the sword control technique. This was the most fundamental art of immortality cultivation, and a mandatory requirement for one's initiation. I watched as she mobilized the spiritual energy within her body, commanding a mere twig, using it as a sword. As she engaged me in midair, I parried over a dozen of her strikes, unable to suppress a word of praise. Excellent. You've actually managed to integrate the intricacies of the Falling Petals Divine Sword Palm into the sword control technique. Huangrong, you truly are a genius. This comprehension is somewhat excessive. It is no wonder you are called the Zhuge of women. Following this, I had her demonstrate the fireball technique and the Five Thunders Heart Manual, and what surprised me the most was the latter. She learned it with extraordinary speed, and her execution of the technique was remarkably fluid. Truly, there are those favored by heaven and earth since birth. I could not help but compare her for a brief moment to Mu Chenyu. As for which of the two possesses the more terrifying talent, it is truly difficult to say. After all, since I obtained the Mirror of the Heavens, it has always revolved around the perspective of Mu Chenyu, yet I have never once seen her actually cultivate. Where then does that earth-shattering power of hers truly originate? Even now, it remains an enigma. However, while Huangrong was studying techniques at the scripture library, I took the opportunity to glance at the Mirror of the Heavens. It was precisely that glance that revealed the truth to me. After utilizing that technique, Mu Chenyu did indeed suffer severe repercussions. Before falling into a deep slumber, she gave specific instructions to Bai Yi to place her within a coffin of ruby crystal and bury it deep beneath the imperial palace. And as for the Empress currently presiding over the Great Wu Imperial Palace and handling state affairs, it is merely a strand of divine scent separated from her true form. With her physical body in deep slumber, I am even less capable of discerning the origin of her strength. Great Emperor Lu Zhou, have you mastered the Five Thunders Heart technique I gave you? Huangrong's words pulled my thoughts back to reality. I nodded and replied, not only have I mastered it, but this technique possesses immense destructive power. Once you return to Southern Song, I fear you shall be able to walk unhindered across the realm. Huangrong's eyes curved into crescents as she smiled. Many thanks, great Emperor Lu Zhou. Once I have fully mastered it, I will ascend to the Hunyuan realm to seek you out. I couldn't help but chuckle. I did not wish to dampen her spirits with cold water, so I simply played along with her words. Very well, I shall await you. During the time that followed, I continued to provide her with guidance while explaining some of the most fundamental principles of immortality cultivation. Thus, inadvertently, the time drew near once more, and her body began to gradually dissipate into nothingness. The countdown within the jade bead held only a few final breaths remaining. Huangrong was clearly becoming anxious, and as she waved at me, she said, Great Emperor Lu Zhou, Do not forget me. I will certainly come to find you. I waved my hand in response, very well, farewell. But just as she was about to vanish, I suddenly recalled something and blurted out, wait, you haven't returned my Taoist robe yet. Huang Rong stuck out her tongue at me playfully. Just consider this robe a gift. I will return it to you when we meet again. And my old garments, remember to keep them well preserved. I shall need to wear them when I return next time. Great Emperor Lu Chu, until we meet again. Farewell, Black Emperor. She waved toward the black dog as well, and in the next moment a surge of before her eyes the world blurred and she vanished instantly from her position. When she was pulled back, she did not land on the boat but plummeted directly into the sea. It turned out the small boat she had used to venture out remained back at the Novice Village. It had not returned with her. Rolling her eyes, she leaped out of the water, taking a few steps to land upon a drifting log. She intended to attempt controlling wood to travel, reasoning that if she could master sword flight, then controlling wood should, in theory, involve the same application of spiritual energy. However, upon actually attempting it, she realized that navigating by wood consumed a significant amount of spiritual energy. Thus, she decisively chose to use her spiritual energy to propel the log, skimming across the surface of the sea at a blistering, flight-like speed. But barely half an incense stick of time later, a massive fish weighing over 1,000 caddies suddenly breached the surface, its blood-stained maw gaping wide to swallow her in one gulp. Huang Rong did not even bother to blink. She raised her hand and gestured, instantly activating the Five Thunders technique. A bolt of lightning pierced through the air, obliterating the giant fish into pieces. Too lazy to even glance at the carcass, she continued her journey. Along the way, she experimented with circulating her chi refining art, and quickly discovered that her fear of exhausting her spiritual energy was unfounded. In other words, her original world also possessed the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. If her assumptions were correct, the spiritual energy on Peach Blossom Island was likely even denser than that of the open sea. Thinking of this, her desire to return home intensified and she urged the log forward across the waves. Several days later, she finally arrived at Peach Blossom Island. As soon as she stepped onto the shore, she found Huang Yaoshi standing there, his face cold, his anger barely contained. Rebellious daughter, how was it? You finally realized that the seas are turbulent and life outside is full of hardship, so you've decided to return? I am warning you. Since you have returned, if you ever dare to run off again, I will break your legs. Upon seeing him, Huang Rong's own temper flared. Father, receive this care for the elderly fist of mine. Huang Yaoshi, who had been looking for a reason to discipline her, felt this was the perfect opportunity. With a flick of his sleeves, he engaged her directly. In his view, while Huang Rong was intelligent, she was ultimately too young. Teaching her a lesson should be as easy as flipping one's palm. He had even calculated his movements, intending to strike lightly so that she would be bedridden for a few days. Just enough to ensure she would remember this lesson. But a moment later, Huang Yaoshi stood stunned. He watched as Huang Rong's hands moved rapidly to form a seal, and a gargantuan fireball materialized, bombarding him from the sky. What martial art is this? Shocked to his core, Huang Yaoshi hurriedly unleashed his flicking finger divine skill. However, the moment his divine technique touched the fireball, it was instantly crushed into dust. He hastily executed the spirit turtle steps to evade, but the moment he dodged, another fireball struck toward him. Huang Yaoshi's expression shifted slightly, leaving him no choice but to desperately rely on his jade flute sword technique to parry. The result was immediate. As soon as they made contact, his sword shattered. With a resounding boom, he was struck head-on by the fireball, his entire body emitting smoke as more than half of his robes were reduced to ash. Huang Rong did not stop. She shifted her hand seals, and through the Five Thunders mental cultivation method, a crackling bolt of lightning descended from the heavens, striking the false father squarely on the head. Huang Yaoshi was charred on the outside and scorched on the inside, his entire body left paralyzed. Had Huang Rong not exercised restraint and avoided delivering a lethal blow, then after such a relentless onslaught, Huang Yaoshi would have been bedridden for at least several months. Hearing the commotion, the disciples under Huang Yaoshi's tutelage rushed out to see, each one of them gaping in astonishment. This was the first time they had witnessed their master suffer such a bitter defeat, and they felt an indescribable sense of satisfaction. Huang Yaoshi opened his mouth, exhaling a puff of lightning-charged smoke, staring at Huang Rong with a face full of shock. Wronger, what kind of cultivation technique have you been practicing? Huang Rong stood with her hands on her hips, puffing out her chest, her Taoist robes lifted slightly, looking exceptionally spirited. Immortal arts, the primordial realm, and the Novice Village all existed simultaneously on the other side. After Huang Rong departed, I could not help but smile, hoping that young girl would know her limits and not truly damage her father. But upon reflection, Huang Rong is no longer a child. She is highly intelligent, and certainly knows the difference between a light touch and a heavy strike. Death was unlikely. At worst, Huang Yaoshi would merely endure some physical suffering. Thinking of this, I dismissed the matter and lowered my head to look at the jade bead around my neck, wondering what reward it would bestow upon me this time. A moment later, within the space of the jade bead, familiar characters appeared. A reward of reaching the 5th level of chi refining. Seeing these words, the corners of my mouth could not help but curl upward. Without hesitation, I immediately sat cross-legged, formed hand seals to circulate the primordial chi refining manual, and began to absorb this surge of power. In truth, I had diligently cultivated at the 4th level of chi refine for 10 years, and I had already accumulated profound insights regarding the 5th level. Furthermore, the rewards provided by the Jade Bead were never merely cultivation base. They also included a deep comprehension of the realm itself, which made this absorption process exceptionally smooth. Very quickly, I was pulled into that boundless space once more, remaining there until I had completely grasped this new strength before being pushed back out. I slowly opened my eyes, first sensing the changes within my body. During the second level of chi refining, a desolate starfield of the universe had manifested within my body, but now, having reached the fifth level of ki refining, particles resembling dust began to appear within that very starfield. I found myself wondering, what exactly was that? The text within the Jade Bead reappeared, illustrating the fifth level of the chi refining stage, where the stardust of the cosmos began to evolve within the body, manifesting as stardust spiritual energy, which doubled the gravity within a 1,000-meter radius. So this was what they called stardust spiritual energy. I nodded, then focused on the final four words. Gravity doubled. This effect seemed rather intriguing. I immediately desired to test it. Thus, I gestured toward the distance and called out, "Dog, come here." The black dog excitedly bounded toward me, but the moment it dashed forward less than half a meter, its movements came to an abrupt halt. In that very instant, it felt as if a mountain had descended directly upon its back, causing all four of its legs to tremble under the immense pressure. Woof, woof! Its tongue lolled out, its entire body shuddering uncontrollably like a leaf in a storm, until finally, unable to bear it any longer, it collapsed onto the ground, its breathing labored, its eyes beginning to roll back. There was no need to wonder. It was obvious that I was the one behind this. The black dog gnashed its teeth in fury. This deceitful villain, it thought, yearning to lunge forward and tear me to shreds. Observing its reaction, I felt quite satisfied. This effect was truly formidable. After all, the black dog's current combat prowess far surpassed that of an ordinary martial arts expert, and for even it to be suppressed to such a state, proved that the doubled gravity was indeed highly effective. I quickly retracted my spiritual energy. The black dog immediately gasped for air and scrambled back to its feet, barking wildly at me, its tail whipping about as it bared its fangs. Although I could not comprehend its insults, I could sense that its words were certainly far from polite. "Brother dog, do not be so temperamental," I said, waving a hand at it with a twinge of guilt. The black dog continued to snarl, clearly desiring to bite me, yet it dared not actually lunge. In the end, it could only retreat, sulking at a distance. I paid it no further mind, and casually attempted to breach the restriction of the Novice Village, but as expected, I was thrown back, my face covered in dust. It seems that reaching the fifth level of chi refining is far from enough to enter and exit this place freely. I must put in more effort. I let out a deep sigh before turning my attention back to the Jade Pearl. The next moment, the second reward manifested. The second reward, the Thunder Emperor's battle garb, crafted from the tendons, bones, and scales of the Thunder Emperor who once suppressed the nine heavens, forged over 100,000 years. Upon equipping it, one's charisma increases by 3, while attack, defense, and speed are multiplied tenfold. No sooner had the text appeared than a set of robes fell into my hands. I donned the garment immediately on the spot. In its dormant state, the battle garb was a simple, elegant white, where any speck of dust that touched it was purified in an instant, appearing as nothing more than a common Taoist robe when not activated, save for the added function of self-cleaning. But I was more concerned with that 3-point increase in charisma. Unable to resist, I pulled out a mirror to gaze at my reflection. Upon looking, I was left stunned. My features had always been quite handsome, on par with the likes of great icons, yet while my facial features had not changed much, there now emanated a divine inviolable aura, as if I were shrouded in the celestial light of the nine heavens. This was truly tailored for me. The more I looked, the more pleased I became, unable to wipe the smile from my face. I then shifted my focus, toggling the garment into combat mode. With a thunderous boom, the white robes instantly transformed. The entire Thunder Emperor's battle garb erupted with a domineering, peerless aura, and in particular a semicircular halo manifested behind my back, filling my entire being with godlike divinity, as if I had stepped out of ancient mythology. The more I observed, the more satisfied I felt, and I couldn't help but wave my hand toward the palace. A brilliant torrent of spiritual energy swept forth instantly, and with a deafening crash, the entire palace was reduced to rubble by my strike. Naturally, I was not alarmed. After all, the architecture in this place possesses the ability to regenerate. Excellent. Simply excellent. I licked my lips, feeling more and more that this artifact was truly terrifying. If I were to add a 2-fold increase in gravity, I fear that even if I encountered an opponent one realm higher than my own, I would not only be capable of standing my ground, but perhaps even capable of an instant kill. I stood there admiring the battle form of the Thunder Emperor's battle garb for a full quarter-hour before reluctantly shifting it back to its normal state. With both rewards claimed, the Jade Pearl returned to its state of silence, and no further text appeared. Nevertheless, I was already thoroughly satisfied. If I were to rely solely on my own comprehension, to break through to the 5th level of chi refining, it would take at least another 6 or 7 years. When all is said and done, this Jade Bead is helping me accelerate my progress. Thinking of this, I could not help but let out a long sigh of relief. Having just achieved a breakthrough, I felt no desire to cultivate further for the time being, and so I took out the heaven mirror once more to observe Mu Chenyu. It is a pity that she remains in a deep slumber. For now, it is that same divine consciousness sitting upon the throne of the great universe, handling state affairs. However, since subduing Long Yong, Mu Chenyu has solidified her position as the absolute pinnacle of that world. Every faction acts as if a massive mountain is weighing down upon them. Even the 3,000 islands of Nanchao have grown significantly more tranquil. Days turned into months, and in the blink of an eye, 10 years rushed by. Throughout these 10 years, I have continuously strived to reach the 6th level of Qi refining, and I have vaguely touched upon the threshold. I am merely missing one final opportunity. Just as I was wondering if it would take another 10 years for someone to arrive, the familiar barking of the black dog suddenly echoed in my ears. My mind stirred instantly. Someone else has entered the Novice Village, and I wonder who has arrived this time. I stood up and strode quickly toward the source of the sound. Upon reaching the waterfall, I caught sight of a woman in white robes lying on the grass. She lay perfectly straight, her figure slender, her skin as fair as jade. Before I had even drawn near, I could already feel a surge of cold air rushing toward my face. It is evident that the cultivation technique she practices is heavily oriented toward ice-attributed energy. What is more peculiar is that a black silk strip is tied across her eyes. The fabric is completely opaque. Once covered, she is rendered entirely blind. Seeing this scene before my eyes, it instantly reminded me of a classic scene from the Return of the Condor Heroes. Looking at her white garments and that cold, ethereal temperament, the name Xiao Longnu immediately surfaced in my mind. The big black dog was squatting beside her, pawing at the ground while barking incessantly, yet the woman remained motionless. The dog barked for a while, and seeing that the other party did not respond, it turned its head to look at me bewildered. I also found the situation strange, so I stepped forward and gently kicked her calf, saying, "This is no place to sleep. Wake up." She still showed no signs of movement, so I leaned down to check her pulse. Meanwhile, within the heart of Xiao Longnu, she was already filled with suspicion and uncertainty. She had originally been at Zhongnan Mountain. When Wu Yang arrived looking for Yang Guo, claiming he wanted to impart martial arts, and fearing she would learn his techniques, he had suddenly struck to seal her acupoints. Caught completely off guard, she was struck immediately. Her body went rigid amidst the fallen leaves, unable to make even the slightest movement. She remained silent, channeling her internal energy in a desperate attempt to break through her sealed acupoints. However, Wu Yangfeng possessed deep and formidable internal strength. It was not so easily undone. Just as she was straining to break the seal, a faint sound of footsteps reached her ears. Someone was approaching, the stealthy steps drawing ever closer. She could only struggle to force out a weak question, "Who goes there?" But her voice was far too faint, barely audible even to her own ears. The intruder offered no reply, continuing to advance steadily toward her. Moments later, a strip of black cloth was tied over her eyes, plunging her vision into total darkness. Following that, she felt a distinct tugging at her belt, as a wave of hot, ragged masculine breath pressed close against her. The person clearly harbored malicious intent. She whispered, "Guo, is that you?" Xiaolongnu's heart tightened, instinctively believing that Yang Guo had returned, yet the stranger remained silent. At the same time, the man was driven further into a feverish state of mind by the mention of that name. He was not Yang Guo, but rather the second disciple under Chu Chuji, Zhen Jibing. Ever since he first laid eyes on Xiaolongnu, Zhen Jibing had been unable to forget her. Tonight, as if possessed by some dark impulse, he had come to Zhongnan Mountain, only to discover her incapacitated by the acupoint strike. Faced with a defenseless Xiaolongnu, his wicked desires momentarily overwhelmed his reason. Summoning his courage, he covered her eyes with the black cloth, intending to take advantage of the situation to defile her. Yet, at the very moment he prepared to strike, a sudden wave of dizziness washed over his vision. When he opened his eyes again, Xiaolongnu had vanished. Where did she go? Had he encountered a ghost? As for myself, the moment I touched her pulse, I immediately understood what had transpired. It turned out she had been struck by an acupoint seal. I withdrew my hand, certain in my heart that the woman in white before me was, in all likelihood, Xiaolongnu. Thus, I spoke up, "Young lady, I can help you release your acupoint, though the required points are somewhat delicate and difficult to access." My apologies for the offense. Having said that, I did not hesitate. I raised my hand and struck several vital acupoints across her chest, abdomen, and legs in one fluid, continuous motion. A moment later, the restriction on her body was broken. The woman in white violently ripped the black cloth from her eyes, spun around. Her movements were graceful and fluid, a posture of extraordinary elegance. "My gratitude to the young hero for your timely rescue." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a trace of wariness and suspicion. As I pondered where this place might be, I was observing her in turn. Her complexion was pallid, her skin as fair as snow, as if she were born devoid of all blood-red vitality. Yet this only served to accentuate her cold, ethereal beauty. Radiant as a lunar fairy, her form enveloped in a faint, misty veil, as if she did not belong to the mortal realm at all. I sighed inwardly. Such beauty was truly not inferior to that of Mu Chengyu. "This is the Hunyuan realm." The little dragon maiden was visibly taken aback. "I have never heard of a novice village in the Hunyuan realm." She looked toward me again, her voice soft and delicate. "I am Longnu. Dare I ask for the young hero's name? This life-saving grace Longnu will surely repay in the future." "Lu Zhou." Upon hearing these three words, I was entirely certain of my suspicions. It was indeed her. In my previous life, while reading the books and watching the films, the impression she left on me was profound. Whether it was the descriptions in the original work, like a rare flower in full bloom, or a glowing piece of fine jade, a beauty unparalleled, or even the Liu Yifei portrayal of the little dragon maiden, all had been deeply etched into the hearts of many. And the most regrettable aspect of the little dragon maiden was the tragic beginning of her journey. Now that she had fallen right before me, it would be heartless of me to remain silent. And so I looked at her and spoke directly. My name is Lu Chu. The person who just now covered your eyes with a black cloth and intended to remove your robes was Zhen Jibing. He sought to humiliate you. The little dragon maiden stood frozen, her complexion turning even paler than before. She was of course familiar with Zhen Jibing, the most renowned disciple of the Quanzhen sect. Who could have expected he would be such a person? At first she was somewhat hesitant to believe it, but upon reflection, she clearly remembered the breath of a man and had sensed the perpetrator pulling at her belt. These words were in all likelihood the truth. Seeing her lost in thought, I decided to offer a firm reminder. Miss Long, you should concern yourself with your own state. Your robes are on the verge of slipping off. She looked down, finally noticing that her sash had long since come loose, and a patch of snow-white skin was on the verge of being fully exposed. She hastily turned around to tighten her garments, the tips of her ears burning a deep crimson. To ease her mind, I did not press her further. I simply waved my hand and said, "Do not dwell on such matters any longer. I shall have Black Dog prepare something for you to eat." She was momentarily stunned. Can a dog truly cook a meal? A moment later, Black Dog charged into the vegetable garden, plucking greens, washing them, chopping, and lighting the fire. Its movements were so practiced and fluid that little dragon maiden watched, transfixed. For a moment, she could no longer distinguish who was the master and who was the servant. While Black Dog was busy cooking, I ushered her into the living quarters, claiming I would perform a divination for her. She sat down obediently and I reached out to take her wrist to examine her palm. In truth, it was no palm reading. I was merely tracing the path of her destiny based on my own memories. I began from the very beginning. The infant girl abandoned outside the Chongyang Palace, taken into the ancient tomb by the handmaiden of Lin Chaoing. I spoke of Yang Guo injuring the Taoist, his subsequent flight from the Quanzhen sect, and how he was rescued by Granny Sun after falling near the ancient tomb. Granny Sun, filled with pity, wished to take him in. Yu, constrained by the sect's rules, initially refused. Later, after Granny Sun was gravely wounded by Hao Datong and entrusted the boy to you during her final moments, you brought Yang Guo back to the ancient tomb and allowed him to sleep on the cold jade bed. As it turned out, the lad could not withstand the freezing aura, and you ended up giving him a sound thrashing. I recounted these past events one by one. Little Dragon Maiden grew increasingly stunned, for these were secrets known only to her and Yang Guo. When she looked at me again, her gaze had shifted entirely, as if she truly regarded me as a divine being. Once I finished the opening chapters, she could not help but press for more. And then, what happened after that? I looked at her and spoke slowly. Afterward, Wu Yongfeng came seeking Yang Guo. Fearing you might steal his martial arts, he sealed your acupoints beforehand. And it was just then that Zhen Jibing seized the opportunity to sneak inside. He sought not only to take possession of your body, at that time she mistook him for Yang Guo. In her delirium, she even mistook that intimacy for the tenderness of Yang Guo. Hearing this, Xiao Longnu trembled violently, her face turning deathly pale as if she had been struck by lightning. Back then, when I read this part, I gritted my teeth in hatred, because she always believed that person was Yang Guo, but from the reader's perspective, that beast was actually Zhen Jibing. Upon hearing me say this, Xiao Longnu's expression turned ashen, her heart pounding erratically, and a surge of chaotic energy rushed upward, causing the internal force within her to spiral out of control. I pressed down on her wrist with a gentle touch, forcing that chaotic energy back into stagnation. I looked at her and asked if she still wished to hear the rest. Xiao Longnu gritted her teeth and said I must hear it, so I continued. Afterward, Yang Guo returned. She was firmly convinced that the person that night was him, but his words that a master cannot be the wife of a disciple caused her immense heartache. Hearing this, she was so enraged that she coughed up blood and turned to leave. After descending the mountain, she caused quite a few disturbances. She wanted to eat steamed buns but had no money to pay for them. When the people tried to detain her, she struck them away and flew off. Because of her beautiful appearance and her ability to fly, the common folk all bowed to her as if she were a bodhisattva. She was as beautiful as she was naive. Someone deceived her by claiming to know Yang Guo, attempting to marry her off to a certain Master Zhang. She was quite intelligent. After escaping, she flew away once more. After leaving the mountain, she missed Yang Guo deeply and returned to that very tree once again. Looking at the fallen leaves, her eyes clouded with tears, wondering in her heart why Guo'er did not wait for her. Could it be that all of Guo'er's professions of love were merely lies? Afterward, she went to the Heroes' Assembly where she reunited with Yang Guo. Guo Jing wished to marry Guo Fu to Yang Guo. She declared in front of everyone that she would marry Yang Guo herself. The entire hall of martial artists condemned them for violating moral principles and lacking shame. Because of this, Yang Guo completely severed his ties with Guo Jing. Later, Jin Lun Fa Wang stepped forward to challenge Huang Rong. It was only through the combined strength of her and Yang Guo's sword. However, her fate was marred by tragedy. She was afflicted by the poison of the love flower, and only a single antidote remained. Fearing that Yang Guo would not survive, she quietly departed and cast herself into the abyss. Before leaving, she deliberately left behind a final message. She bid him to wait 16 years, believing that after such a span he might finally forget her and begin a new life. As she spoke these words, the internal energy within her body began to clash violently. I had no choice but to intervene once more to suppress the turmoil. She looked up at me, asking, "Is there more to the tale?" I looked at her and offered a faint smile. It was not the end. Although the narrative seemed to reach a broken conclusion there, it was destined to continue. She leapt into the abyss, yet she did not perish, instead falling to the depths of the Valley of Heartbreak. The valley was surrounded by sheer cliffs with a deep pool at its base. Falling from such a height left her gravely wounded, but she did not die upon impact. At the bottom of the valley, there was an abundance of fish and vegetation, ensuring she would not succumb to starvation. She spent 16 long, arduous years in solitude at the bottom of that chasm. Throughout those years, she carved pleas for help onto the wings of the jade bees. It was not until Yang Guo eventually leapt down himself that he finally discovered her, and ultimately, with the assistance of Huang Rong's group and their woven ropes, they were able to ascend from the depths. No sooner had I finished speaking than she frowned, her blood surging, and she coughed up a mouthful of blood on the spot. I hastily reached out to support her, guiding her circulation and rectifying the chaotic internal energy rampaging through her meridians. She remained calm for a long moment before raising her head to look at me. Immortal Master, I have a question. Speak, I replied. Does it concern Huang Rong? What of Huang Rong? She looked at me and said, Huang Rong has long since become a legend. I was stunned into silence. What do you mean? She nodded. You just mentioned Guojing and Huang Rong. I replied, that is correct. They are husband and wife. Xiaolong shook her head. That is not so. Huang Rong did not marry Guojing. According to the legends of that year, she sought to provoke the eastern heretic Huang Yaoshi and sailed out to sea alone. She ended up drifting into a truly peculiar place, and from that point on, she mastered a set of bizarre techniques. I casually finished her thought. The Qi refining art, sword control, fireball talisman, and the Five Thunders heart manual? Xiaolong nodded. Something of that nature. Afterward, she returned to Peach Blossom Island, defeated the Eastern Heretic in a single battle, and went into permanent seclusion. Later still, a heavenly tribulation suddenly descended upon Peach Blossom Island. Once the lightning tribulation dissipated, Huang Rong vanished along with it. Some say that she had successfully transcended the mortal realm. She finished speaking and then stared intently at me. Wait a moment, how do you know the names of those ancient texts? My tongue had moved faster than my thoughts. Those techniques Huang Rong possessed were things I had taught her myself. Xiaolong was left stunned, and I felt a chill run down my spine. It seemed the path of Huang Rong's character had truly been altered by my hand, and the shift was far more drastic than I had anticipated. She neither set sail to meet Guojing nor followed the path dictated by fate, but instead she ascended directly. Even to me, this turn of events felt entirely absurd. Xiaolong asked again where she had ascended to. I could only shake my head. I truly did not know, for even I had never expected things to unfold in such a manner. I let out a sigh and recounted the simple sequence of events to her. Back then, Huang Rong had wandered into this place, and when I prepared a meal of black dog meat, she ate with such haste that her internal energy spiraled out of control. It was I who helped her refine that energy into spiritual power, guiding her to set foot upon the path of cultivation. I had initially assumed her ambition was mere talk, yet who could have guessed she would actually ascend? Xiaolong listened in a daze, stunned to learn that Huang Rong had once been here. I nodded. If things had followed their original trajectory, she should have sailed across the sea to meet Guojing, and eventually married him, but now her character arc had clearly diverged. The more I pondered it, the more my head throbbed. Huang Rong had changed, but what of Jiang Yuyan? And what of Qin Shi Huang? Jiang Yuyan was too far away for Xiaolong to know the details, but given the passage of time, Qin Shi Huang must surely have been influenced by now. I questioned her further, but she only knew the legends of the first emperor that had been passed down through history, which were no different from what I already knew. This was even more peculiar. Could Qin Shi Huang be hiding his true strength, or did parallel worlds truly exist? The more I thought, the more chaotic my mind became, so I decided to stop dwelling on it. I had done everything I could, and whatever discrepancies arose in the future were no longer matters I could control. Just as I was lost in these thoughts, a wave of fragrance drifted toward me. It was clear that the black dog had finished its task. I had to tend to Xiaolong and see that we had our meal first. I guided her over and we sat at the table with the black dog to begin eating. Xiaolong watched as the black dog skillfully wielded its bowl and chopsticks. She was nearly stunned into silence. In her eyes, this was no mere beast. It was clearly a creature that had attained spiritual enlightenment. The black dog noticed her persistent gaze, and mistakenly believing she harbored affections for it, it immediately became invigorated. It gestured toward a plate of bok choy with its paw, signaling for her to eat more. Xiaolong smiled faintly, a smile that left the black dog completely dazed. Drool began to drip into the basin, and I slapped it across the head to bring it back to its senses. You are drooling everywhere. Keep that dog's mouth of yours in check. The black dog bared its teeth in indignation, clearly blaming me for ruining its prospects. Looking at its expression, I did not need to guess. It was almost certainly lost in its own delusions. Even if Xiaolong were to kneel and propose, the dog would likely weep with joy and agree. It needed to wake up and eat its meal. The black dog slammed the table and barked wildly in protest, as if to say, if you aren't going to eat, get out. Only then did it lower its head and begin to devour its rice. Xiaolong was accustomed to a frugal, austere diet, consuming little more than honey, but upon tasting a few bites this time, her eyes lit up, especially when she tried the chives. The moment they touched her tongue, the fragrance exploded in her mouth. Immediately thereafter, her entire body began to heat up. Her face flushed and sweat soaked through her white robes. She swallowed hard and said, Immortal Master, I am burning up. At first I paid it little mind. After all, they were just simple chives, were they not? But when I placed my hand upon her pulse, I was instantly taken aback. It could not be. Were these wretched chives actually spiritual herbs to her? The surging energy within her body was turning the world upside down. Unable to steady herself, she had no choice but to lean against me. Lady Long, this is surely inconvenient, I remarked. Her face was scorching red and her voice trembled. Forgive me, immortal master, I cannot stand. I had no choice but to lift her into my arms. We needed to find stability before deciding what to do next. The black dog sat behind us, its ears pricked, its eyes seemingly asking, "Is this how you go about helping people?" I could not be bothered to pay it any mind. I carried her directly to the hot spring and had her sit in a meditative posture. The heat emanating from her was so intense that she was shrouded in white steam. I raised my hand and pressed it against her brow to help guide the rampaging energy, yet after much I pondered for a moment, deducing that the heat dissipation was insufficient, and turned to look at her. Lady Long, you must remove your outer garments. Only then can the meridians dissipate this energy. Her entire body went limp, leaving her to look at me with a flushed face. I have no strength left. Could you assist me? I feigned a hesitant refusal, reminding myself that as a man, propriety dictates that men and women should not touch, but to save her, I decided to bear the burden of this ill repute. Lady Long, please forgive this Lu for his insolence. I reached out to undo her sash, my movements far more practiced than I had anticipated. With a few swift motions, I stripped away the white robes from her form. Her shoulders and arms were as white as snow, and her collarbones were so delicate they seemed capable of cradling water. Heated by the steam, her entire body glowed with a charming radiant crimson, and droplets of water traced paths down her locks. Truly, she is a source of calamity. Fortunately, I did not allow my heart to waver, focusing solely on helping her channel that surge of power. Yet the wave of heat was too ferocious. She began bit by bit to edge closer to me. She embraced my legs, yet I acted as if I saw nothing. I continued to circulate my spiritual energy, guiding her through repeated cycles of stabilization. It took roughly the span of a quarter hour before the surge was finally suppressed. She exhaled a long breath, and the flush on her face finally began to fade. Only then did I withdraw my hands. It is done. Examine your condition for yourself. She immediately closed her eyes to perform an internal inspection. When she opened her eyes again, her spirit had transformed. She could perceive that the power within her body was far greater than it had been before. She prepared to rise to express her gratitude, yet she forgot her current state. At this moment, she was still in the water, and as she stood up, droplets of water cascaded incessantly along the curves of her figure. She herself was stunned for a moment, and immediately thereafter, a sharp cry rang out as she submerged herself back into the water. "Immortal Master, turn away," she commanded, and I obediently complied. Only then did she realize her own garments were completely soaked, forcing her to ask me for a change of clothes. I stepped out of the hot spring, took a set of clean Taoist robes from my spatial ring, and placed them on the stone table. "Wear these for now." From within the water, she whispered her thanks. Once I had departed, she leaped from the spring, dried her body, and donned my Taoist robes. She then took her original garments to the side of the waterfall to wash them clean, leaving them to dry under the sunlight. When she came to find me again, water still clung to the tips of her hair, and the Taoist robes themselves were damp in several places. I watched her, shaking my head. She hadn't even dried her hair. She remained silent, so I raised my hand and released a gentle breeze, helping her dry her long hair, which cascaded in the wind like a dark waterfall. The sunlight caught her just right, making her appear as a celestial being descended from the heavens. I cast a glance at her, and she was staring intently back at me, her eyes unblinking, as if she had discovered for the very first time that such a beautiful person could truly exist in this world. By the time she came to her senses, her ears were flushed a deep crimson. I withdrew my hand. It was done. She softly opened her mouth. "Many thanks, Immortal Master." She cast a few more stolen glances in my direction. "Immortal Master, I wish to go there," she said, pointing toward the library pavilion. I escorted her there, first explaining the general layout of the first floor, then proceeding to the second floor, where I expounded upon the Kun, Xian, and Kan sectors for her. She listened with rapt attention, and upon standing before the Kan sector, she was astonished. It was no wonder Huang Rong was able to reach such heights. So the root of it all lay here. Seeing her hesitate for a long time, unable to make a choice, I reminded her that to truly embark on the path of immortality, one must begin with this qi-refining meridian technique. I caught a glimpse of her selection, a shrewd choice, for it could refine and restore qi simultaneously, a truly orthodox path. Since she had chosen this, I would bestow upon her an even more formidable manual to complement it. I withdrew another volume from the bookshelf, the Fu Yao Dragon Ascension Technique, which required one to first cultivate the Yin Prosperity Spirit Method, and thereafter train in the Fu Yao Dragon Ascension. The former would help her establish a firm foundation, while the latter would grant her the path to undergo the final transformation into a dragon. Xiaolongnu was shaken upon hearing this. Transform into a dragon? I nodded. 9 transformations in total. If she could overcome them all, she would truly ascend to become a dragon. To tell the truth, I myself began to wonder, if she were to truly become a dragon, what form would she take? She, however, was so stunned by this immortal technique that she was left speechless. Repeatedly offering her gratitude, I reached out to steady her hands. "Do not thank me yet. If you truly wish to show your gratitude, wait until you have ascended into a dragon to speak of it." The time she had left here was growing short. I glanced at the Jade Pearl. At 2012-12, converted to ancient time, there was not much left remaining. She dared not delay any longer, immediately clutching the book and burying herself in diligent practice. But before she had turned many pages, she hurried back to me with a serious expression, asking what the phrase "nourish the spirit and return to the Tao" truly signified. I had no choice but to explain it to her from the beginning. The Tao is the inception of all things. It is the origin of the one from which all creation emerges. She nodded incessantly, continuing to press me with further questions. It is only natural for one question to lead to the next. This manual was indeed profound and obscure, so I remained by her side, clarifying its complexities piece by piece. After hours of struggle, lasting more than 3 incense sticks, she finally touched the threshold of understanding. Having mastered the fundamentals of the Yinfu Shengshen technique, I let out a sigh of relief. The next step was to teach her the art of transforming into a dragon. Upon hearing of the dragon transformation, her eyes lit up. If one could become a dragon through cultivation, why bother with ordinary martial arts? I glanced at the jade orb. At 11:48 and 12 seconds, time was running thin, so I decided against letting her struggle on her own. I would transmit the knowledge directly. She was startled for a moment, but as I nodded, she accepted. This was to be an enlightenment transmission, where all my insights regarding the Fu Yao Hua Long Tian would be channeled directly into her sea of consciousness. How much she could absorb would depend entirely upon her own aptitude. She did not hesitate, sitting cross-legged immediately. I pressed a single finger against her forehead, and my divine sense descended accordingly. The moment I entered, her body tensed, and her limbs began to tremble, forcing me to warn her. Relax your body. If you continue to resist, your sea of consciousness will become chaotic, and you truly risk becoming a fool. She took several deep breaths, finally allowing her body to relax bit by bit. I guided my divine sense along her meridians, advancing directly into her sea of consciousness. I condensed my understanding of the Fuyao Hua Longtian into a glowing orb and infused it directly into her mind. Now absorb this slowly. If there is anything you do not understand, ask me. She nodded, her hand swiftly forming seals as she began to digest the glowing orb. As she entered a meditative state, countless golden silhouettes appeared around her, spinning in a constant cycle. Each figure demonstrated a different movement, an awe-inspiring sight that carried a true aura of the immortals. Throughout this process, she would occasionally open her eyes to ask me questions, and I would provide detailed word-for-word explanations. Time slipped away and the jade orb ticked forward, reaching 1:28 and 32 seconds before she finally concluded her practice. A smile blossomed. I stared intently at her. She had finally completed her first transformation. Without a word of hesitation, she clenched her fist, her clothes billowing without a breeze as her dark hair danced wildly, and a jade-like radiance shimmered across her skin. She then drove a fist into the ground, shattering the earth within a 10-foot radius into a crater. I nodded continuously as I watched. The first stage of the Fuyao Dragon transformation, which is inherently a refinement of the mortal shell, for her to reach this stage within 5 hours is truly preposterous. She immediately worried about having damaged the ground and hurried to apologize, but I waved my hand, telling her there was no need to panic as this place would repair itself. Only then did she breathe a sigh of relief, before looking up at me and pleading, "Immortal Master, please spar with me. I also wish to know exactly how much stronger I have become." I stood opposite her and replied decisively, "Proceed." She was to strike as she pleased. She did not stand on ceremony, taking a single step forward to launch a close-quarters assault. Yet no matter how she struck, it felt no more than a gentle itch against my body. The more she fought, the more anxious she grew, until she unleashed even the secret techniques of the Mu sect, but it remained entirely to no avail. Eventually, she was drenched in sweat, her robes clinging to her frame. Seeing that she could truly hold out no longer, I finally countered with a few casual strikes, causing her to collapse onto the ground. She gasped for air, her cheeks flushed a deep crimson. It was hopeless, truly hopeless, and unwilling to continue the assault, I left her to stabilize her energy on her own. However, she stood up quickly, her expression solemn, eager to continue. It was a rare opportunity to be guided by an immortal, and she did not wish to waste it. I humored her, continuing to dismantle her moves and offer guidance, but as we fought, I suddenly noticed her figure beginning to blur bit by bit, much like a paper shadow being torn apart. I looked up and saw that the time was up. She had begun to panic. "Immortal Master, what is happening to me?" I waved my hand at her. "Do not be afraid, the time has come and you must return." She parted her lips, clearly still wanting to speak, yet the words reached her throat only to vanish into silence. In the end, with a face full of frustration, she was pulled away by that inexplicable force. When she descended to the ground once more, she had returned to Zhongnan Mountain. All around her, the shroud of night remained. Zhao Zhiping was startled, seeing a white figure suddenly emerge from the void with her back to him, appearing as phantom-like as a ghost. Before he could even discern her form, Xiaolongnu turned around. Zhao Zhiping stood dazed, gazing upon her. He was just about to feign ignorance and introduce himself. Yet Xiaolongnu did not waste a single word. She moved directly to kill. At this moment, a single intent consumed her mind, to execute him. Zhao Zhiping could not even react. She struck him directly through the chest and he collapsed on the spot. Zhao Jing, hiding in the distance, was seized by terror. Just as he attempted to slink away unnoticed, Xiaolongnu's voice resonated from behind him. "Did I give you permission to leave?" Zhao Zhijing was terrified out of his wits, fleeing as if his life depended on it. But after only a few steps, a jade hand pierced through his chest from behind. He could not even finish a complete sentence before he fell headlong, dead upon the ground. Xiaolongnu did not even glance at him, turning to head back toward the ancient tomb. She had no room in her heart for other thoughts. She only wished to quickly continue practicing the dragon transformation manual. Watching the place where she had vanished, I was momentarily uncertain. Was her personality truly capable of such cold-blooded killing? But upon reflection, if she had truly arrived in time, Zhao Zhiping was destined not to survive this day. There is no use in overthinking. She has returned, and the path has been paved for her. How far she goes from here depends entirely on her. I only hope she can alter that most tragic of fates. As for the dragon transformation, I dare not harbor too much hope. This technique is immensely difficult. Even in the world of cultivation, success is far from guaranteed. Let alone in the martial arts realm, but regardless of the difficulty, there remains a glimmer of hope. I withdrew my gaze and looked down at the jade pearl. The new reward had arrived just as expected. The first item was another level of cultivation. I was currently stuck at the peak of the 5th level of chi refining, lacking only that final step. This reward came at the perfect moment. Fearing the disturbance would be too great, I decisively left the palace, distancing myself from the vegetable garden and the lotus pond. Finding an open space, I sat cross-legged in the void and began to absorb the influx of cultivation and insights. As soon as I entered meditation, the world grew dim, and the spiritual energy from all directions condensed into vortexes, pouring madly into the crown of my head. The black dog watched me from afar, its expression as if it had seen a ghost. What kind of trick is this fellow playing now? Before it could fathom the situation, a thunderous explosion echoed in the sky, and a purple tribulation lightning bolt crashed down with a roar. The Lightning Emperor battle armor instantly manifested upon my body, a halo of light ignited behind my head, and I stood like a deity before the heavenly gate, undergoing the tribulation. Very quickly, humanoid figures formed from lightning emerged. Armed with blades, spears, swords, and halberds, they lacked nothing. I opened my eyes and began the slaughter. As I struck down those lightning humanoids, I simultaneously harnessed the purple lightning to temper my body frantically. My black hair danced wildly, standing on end from the electrical discharge. The entire appeared on the verge of collapse as layers of purple lightning cascaded down. The sea of stars within my body surged in response, continuously fracturing and repairing itself. Fracturing again and repairing again. I do not know how long this evolution lasted, but within the sea of stars, a seed the size of a fist finally coalesced. The moment it took form, it began to devour everything. Waves of purple energy divine to the extreme flooded my being. I suddenly snapped my eyes open and flicked my hand casually. A single strand of hair pierced straight through a leaf drifting through the air. Only then did I let out a breath. I had finally succeeded. At the 6th level of chi refining, the jade bead displayed 2 lines of text, innate purple energy of the life Tao seed, and a strand of hair capable of piercing mysterious iron. I gasped in disbelief. If this were known to the outside world, who would believe it was the work of a 6th level chi refining practitioner? Whose chi refining stage could ever be this heaven-defying? I would believe it if one told me these were the methods of a saint, but regardless of my doubts, the path ahead must still be walked. Following my usual routine, I tested the restrictions of the Novice Village once more, but the result remained unchanged. It was completely unscathed. The characters on the jade bead shifted rapidly. Upon seeing the second reward, the collection pavilion, I was momentarily stunned. Then I drew in a sharp breath. It contained nothing but clothing. From black stockings and short skirts to tight dresses, no accessory was missing. Furthermore, the supply was inexhaustible and would automatically replenish itself. I couldn't help but grin. This was truly excellent. Should anyone else happen to wander into this place, at least they would not lack for garments. The next time a man arrives, I might just make him try on a pair of black stockings. As soon as the thought crossed my mind, I hurriedly extinguished it. I am not that kind of person, at least not yet. While I was pondering how to utilize the collection pavilion, it suddenly manifested within my mind of its own accord. With a single thought, within my dantian, should I desire it, I can enter to select at any moment. I could even bring others inside to see. However, I shall refrain from such things. There are too many garments, and they are quite overwhelming to the eye. It is far less troublesome to simply choose on someone else's behalf. If I have already bestowed the black stockings, I shall leave them. Whether she chooses to wear them is a matter for later. As the rewards dissipated, I felt too lazy to dwell on it further. I withdrew the heaven's mirror to observe Mu Chenyu once more, and upon looking, I found myself somewhat surprised. She had emerged from that crimson jade crystal light and recalled the divine sense she had previously left outside. Clad in her dragon robes, she sat upon the throne. As the high officials below stepped forward one by one to report, they spoke of a great crisis having occurred at the Burial Emperor Sea, where malevolent, eerie entities had taken on human forms. They launched an invasion from the western desert, where Bai Yi led 300,000 troops into a desperate battle. The result was a loss of over 200,000, leaving only a few tens of thousands remaining to hold the border at all costs. Fortunately, those monsters had not yet breached the borders of Great Yu, otherwise the consequences would have been unimaginable. Only then did I realize it was no wonder Mu Chenyu had awakened so early. It turned out that the western desert could no longer suppress the threat. Yet before she could even provide an answer, another high official submitted a petition stating that half of the 3,000 isles of the southern nest had formed an alliance. Clearly fearing that Great Yu would settle the score later, some proposed pacifying the southern nest first to excise this malignant tumor before turning back to deal with the Burial Emperor Sea in the western desert. The entire court of Yunwu expressed their clamorous agreement. Mushu sat upon the throne without a word, simply crossing her legs as she pondered in silence. After a long while she stood up. If war is what is demanded, then let there be war. State Preceptor Hong Rui, present your strategy. 3 days later, the strategy was finalized, and State Preceptor Hong Rui led 10 million soldiers of the 100 Nations through the teleportation array, marching majestically toward the southern nest. On that day, the entire sky over the southern nest was shrouded in darkness. Countless cultivators on the other side of the mirror were deeply shaken while I sat here, watching with great amusement.